Great. Good. All right. I am calling this workshop to order. So today we're here with many of our committees and partners around conservation. I'm really happy and excited to be having this conversation with everybody today. This year, the council made a deliberate attempt at establishing conservation goals, really looking to these bodies to help guide us to figure out ways that we can achieve better conservation and achieve the 30 by 30 goal that the state has put together. And so I think this is kind of our first real strategic conversation. We've done a lot of things as a town, at least as my time as a town councilor, where different things have come forward that have kind of addressed this topic, but we've never really sat down to have a real deliberate conversation on this topic with these bodies. And so I'm excited that we're able to do this today. And I want to thank Councillor Shoup for helping take the lead to kind of partner with everybody to organize this workshop today. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So I'll pass it off to Councillor Shoup.
I serve as liaison to the Conservation Commission and the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and we also have Scarborough Land Trust sitting at the table with us tonight. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thanks to the volunteers who work on these boards. You know, when I first decided to run, I was on planning board before, and I thought, you know, maybe we could do a little more when it comes to planning. We could put a little more conservation into our planning process, in our site review process. And so when I became elected, becoming liaisons to these committees seemed really appropriate. Once I became liaisons, I became quickly aware of how knowledgeable these committees are and how much expertise they are in these fields. So I appreciate everyone for giving their time to us and coming here tonight and really joining the conversation and really integrating yourselves, I think, into the process. And so when I just want to say, I want to thank all the members again tonight. And so first, let's go around and introduce everyone that we have here with us. So I don't know if you want to start over here. You could say who you are and what member of the board you are.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Slavinsky. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission.
Hi, Maggie Vishno on the Conservation Commission as well.
Marla Zando, Conservation Commission.
Hi, Noah Perlett. I'm on the Planning Board and the Land Bond Board.
Jessica Sargent, Conservation Commission and Parks and Land Conservation Board.
Randy Hogan, Conservation Commission.
Suzanne Foley Ferguson, Parks and Conservation Land Board.
Scott Kunkler, I'm the Conservation Director with the Scarborough Land Trust.
Kathleen Miller, Conservation Commission.
Great. We have 4 presenters tonight. So if you guys want to dive right in.
Great. For every Conservation Commission meeting, we open with a land acknowledgement. So I thought it would be appropriate to do that tonight. I want to begin our time together with an acknowledgement honoring all Indigenous people, the people who came here before us and nurtured this place as stewards of Mother Earth, the first people. I make this acknowledgement aware that this land is unceded and that issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing in the Wabanaki homeland. I acknowledge the Uwaskawag people who once lived in what is now Scarborough, and that as we support efforts for land and water protection, we honor the current tribes who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And our first speaker is going to be Noah.
Thank you. All right, so in the field of land conservation and conservation biology, there's been research and of this going on since the 1980s when the field first started. And even though that's a remarkable amount of time, the principles of it really have not changed. And my goal for the next few minutes is to talk very plainly about these principles and give you then a visual schematic about how we as a community can think about these principles and frame them towards action over the next few years until 2030. And so I've boiled this down to really kind of 4 key points that are very linked to each other. All right, when you're thinking about how do we conserve land, where do we conserve land, there's 4 ideas that you want to keep in mind through this process. The first of this is that the larger, the better. Larger reserves allow all kinds of organisms, plants and animals, mobility. They allow them to make decisions. They allow them to change over time. But importantly, it's not only about the organisms in there in terms of the wildlife and plants. It's also about humans. You know, one thing that I hear all the time from our community is, I want longer hiking trails. I want to be able to walk greater distances. I want to be able to walk further into these lands. And so larger parcels meet those dual objectives of supporting biodiversity and supporting kind of our own personal interests. Scarborough will never be Baxter State Park. That's not what we're talking about. But there is a big difference between a 20-acre parcel, the feel of being inside a 20-acre parcel versus the feel of being in a 100-acre parcel. That really feels different in many ways. So the second component to this, after the size, is this idea of diversity. And so what diversity means is it's defined at a local level. We can't use the word diversity the same way that we would talk about diversity in Costa Rica or in Panama. We're in Scarborough, Maine, and our diversity is very simple. Thinking about going from open water to upland forests. And what are the habitats and the plants and animals that occur in between those places? And so trying to think about conservation in a way where we're not only conserving the upland forests, or we're not only conserving the tidal marshes, we're allowing space to go across that diversity of places. Even though it's not wildly diverse, it's what's here. And we do appreciate what's here. The third component to this is contiguous, meaning parcels that are conserved and accessible that are next to each other or as nearby as possible. And that really goes back to this, what I talked about in the beginning about size, and that allows things to move. Things meaning us, things meaning water, things meaning plants and seeds, things meaning animals. It allows things to move when it's contiguous and next to each other. And that's not always so easy, particularly given roads. Roads are a massive barrier, and most roads, I mean, aside from the one in Scarborough that we're talking about removing, which is incredibly rare, most roads are here to stay and frequently grow, frankly, get wider, right, with larger communities. So keeping in mind this idea of trying to make connectivity across parcels and make them connecting. And so then finally, thinking about landscapes, right? Scarborough is a town, and our job is to think about Scarborough, but we're surrounded by other towns that have conserved lands, other towns that have farms. And are there ways for us to leverage these linkages from other places across the landscape? So these are the ideas that I hope we can frame and think about. I think they're really basic, but they're incredibly important as you're thinking about land conservation. Because sometimes it's so easy to get into the weeds of, does it have this one species, or does it have this one thing that I'm looking for? That gets so complicated. And sometimes we just need to back off and just look at it from 10,000 feet of the big objectives. And with that idea, I want to go to this beautiful map that our GIS folks, can I get this out of the way? I'm sorry.
Minimize.
It's moving slow. This was a really great map that was just completed through the Conservation Commission, working with our GIS staff here at the town. And this map shows you all of the conserved land here in Scarborough. So currently 17% of our town is conserved. Don't worry about the colors. The colors indicate different levels of conservation. For my purpose, that's not what matters. Let's think about the physical place of conservation. Where is it happening? And is it near other places? How big is it? And are there ways that we can maximize those ideals that I just talked about? Size, connectivity, shape. Can we look what we currently have now, and over the next 7 years, 6 years, think about these other ideals? And here is a model. Now, I just made this up, okay? I want to really get this. Let me move this out of the way, sorry. How do I get, Jamie, how do I get this thing moved? Oh, great, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I looked at our lands and thought about thinking about the landscape, thinking about the currently existing infrastructure. And I came up with this broad model of 4 kind of regions to focus conservation on, okay? This is not set in stone. This is just a way for us to frame our thinking. These boundaries can all change. But it's looking at where we currently have conservation assets that are in important areas that you can envision them being connected. And you can envision moving yourself across these areas. And can we focus geographically into these regions on where we have folks that are interested in conserving their lands? Can we take advantage of that and make connections across these landscapes? And it's this kind of framework that I hope we really start thinking of, is what we don't want to do is say, you know what, we're just going to conserve that 3 acres here. We're going to conserve that 5 acres here that are totally isolated. That's not supportive of conservation goals, because they can't support biodiversity for a long time. They can't support us getting out and enjoying those landscapes for long periods of time. But doing it in a way where we have connectivity, geographic connectivity, and diversity of habitats as you move across those landscapes. So that's what these 4 schematics are trying to show. And again, these aren't hard boundaries that I've drawn up. It's more just so that you can visualize, you know, what does an upland conservation region look like? What does a conservation region look like that starts in tidal marshes and moves along the coast? All right, so I think I'm gonna stop there with one last exception, in that if you look at these regions, and let's say that we decided, I'm totally making this up, that we're gonna focus on these 4 regions and we're gonna try to conserve lands in these kind of 4 sections. Importantly, with the diversity of colors up there, not one agency is going to be able to do that. We have to have many tools in the toolkit. The land trust is one, the town is another, farming opportunities is another, the state, federal opportunities. It's all tools together in that toolkit for conservation in order to kind of fill in this landscape. All right, thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me here this evening to share my expertise on the economic benefits of conserving lands. This very brief overview is based on research that I've conducted in communities in Maine and across the country. I've tried to highlight local data as much as possible, and I can provide you with the underlying studies if you really love to read long studies. Local recreational access is important because most recreational activity in Maine is by residents at municipal parks and open spaces, according to the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. So it's critical that these close to home resources are available in Scarborough. And those benefits accrue to residents. People are willing to pay for recreational access to trails and parks and conserve lands. This value exists even if the individual doesn't have to pay to use those amenities, like pay an entrance fee. The benefit accrues in one of 2 ways. One, cost savings. They would have paid, but they don't have to. Or they would save on travel costs because they don't have to travel further to bring their families to a park or a trail or to conserve lands. The recreational value for community residents is based on the number of residents who are visiting those conserved lands, the types and frequency of the activities that they engage in, and the value of those recreational activities. Based on the Army Corps of Engineers Unit Day value methodology, I like to say, we're not crazy here that these have values, that super liberal Army Corps of Engineers, they talk about these recreational use values. And we can assign a dollar value to those visits and those activities that folks engage in. And we do that through Oregon State University's recreational use values database. They have over 420 studies that talk about the values associated with those activities. No research has been done currently for Scarborough on our visitation to our conserved lands and our parks to estimate that value today. Conserved lands also provide numerous health benefits. People with access to the outdoors show long-term health improvements. For example, nature reduces symptoms of attention deficit disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, mental health, Spending just 20 minutes a day connecting with nature can help lower stress hormone levels. Parks and recreational access reduces childhood obesity. My research has found that adults who exercise regularly save $1,230 to $2,470 per year by being able to actively recreate on conserved lands, meeting the CDC guidelines. So those are residents. We also have a lot of folks who come here to visit. Land conservation in Scarborough supports a thriving tourism and outdoor recreation economy. The outdoor recreation tourist economy includes spending by visitors. Travelers to conserve lands with public access, such as parks and trails, spend money locally, supporting local income and jobs. In 2019, the Greater Portland and Casco Bay region received 5.6 million visitors, of which Scarborough is a part, who spent $650 million supporting over 10,000 jobs with $210 million in total earnings, and maybe important to this group, $6.4 million in total taxes. Scarborough visitors to conserved lands represent a portion of these regional figures, and activities on conserved lands span multiple visitor purpose categories. So you see the active outdoor recreation by tourists was 38%, but activities on conserved lands, such as water activities, span many of these categories. Oh, and sorry, that was from the Maine Office of Tourism. Land conservation has an important role to play in sustaining the agriculture, commercial fishing and shellfishing, and forest products industries locally. One example is Broadturn Farm, with the CSA, weddings, farm stands, educational programs, and more. These activities support local jobs, income, sales, and value added. The Scarborough Land Trust has a fact sheet on the economic benefits of the Broadturn Farm that they can share. So this is not just me. Strong local economies have a stronger tax base. Conserved lands help communities cultivate a competitive advantage by enhancing quality of life and attracting talent, employers, and investment. The ability of quality open space and recreation resources helps to attract businesses. Many workers choose a job based on an area's quality of life, which is increased by the availability of open spaces. Furthermore, small businesses, decision makers rate parks, recreation, and open space as amenities as being one of the most important factors in measuring quality of life. Saving land can also help local economies. A recent study of all major towns and cities in New England found that land conservation increased local employment numbers and the labor force without reducing development. That is measured as reducing, it did not reduce new housing permits. New development not only brings more revenue, but more expenses, particularly residential development. Undeveloped land can be beneficial to communities because it brings more in revenue than it use in services if developed. While it is dated, there are two Scarborough studies that have come to the same conclusion. Jeremy Winterstein's master's thesis, which is also on the Scarborough Land Trust website, found that Scarborough's cost of community services, looking at residential development, required $1.22 in services for every $1 in tax revenue generated. The 2000 cost benefits of land use options in Scarborough found that single family subdivisions cost $1,194 per unit. That is, it was net negative. Conserved lands also have a positive impact on nearby home values and associated property tax revenues. A robust literature has demonstrated that various benefits of conserved lands, a robust literature has shown the positive impact that conserved lands have on property values and property tax revenues. There we go. Such as open space acquisitions, increasing home values across the municipality, and vacant lands that share a border with conserved lands, either through fee simple or conservation easement, increase in value. My own research has measured the lower bound increase in home values within 500 feet of a conserved parcel to be 5%. So we talked a lot about things that are people focused, but I wanted to also talk about the natural goods and services provided by conserved lands. My 2012 study found that every $1 invested in land for Maine's future returned $11 in natural goods and services. That includes things like water. Conserved lands support water quality because their pervious surfaces capture and absorb precipitation, slow runoff, infiltrate and recharge groundwater, filter out pollutants. And the vegetation on conserved lands provide considerable surface area that intercepts stormwater and rainwater. In effect, these green spaces function like storage reservoirs, reducing peak flows of runoff during rain events. It's a proactive approach to avoiding stormwater management costs. Converting natural vegetated areas to impervious cover decreases water quality and requires the implementation of costly best management practices, or BMPs, such as infiltration trenches, biofiltration, just to meet regulatory requirements. Flooding is the most expensive natural hazard in Cumberland County. While York County is the highest in terms of property and crop loss, Cumberland County is second. So by investing in conserved lands, we can avoid costly damage to property and avoid losses. I'm going to quickly go through air quality. Air pollution is expensive, an expensive problem associated with growth that injures human health and damages structures, including a 2019 study of Freeport that showed, and this is only 323 trees, that they provide $5,069 in benefits annually and $60,000 worth of carbon storage. And lastly, I wanted to touch on climate change. So climate change is expected to have an important impact to communities across the state. Intense rainstorms are likely to occur more frequently, causing more flooding, especially where existing paved and developed areas increase storm flows. Summer drought conditions will strain public water supplies. Invasive plants and insects will also expand in this changing landscape. Studies have shown that municipal land use land cover decisions will have a larger impact on the magnitude of stormwater, flooding, and water quality than climate change itself. For example, a town that conserves and actively manages its forest land with some development can be expected to experience less stormwater and flooding issues than a similarly situated town that develops more of its natural forest due to a greater amount of impervious area and less natural groundwater infiltration and storage. A study investigating both runoff and water quality found as runoff increases, pollutants such as suspended solids, nitrogen, and phosphorus will also increase. Without land conservation, costly BMPs may have to be employed here to reduce runoff and treat pollutants such as nutrients and sedimentation through biological, chemical, and physical processes. I look forward to your questions at the end of this formal presentation, and I now hand it off to Sue. As you can see, it's really hard to talk about the benefits in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
right. And talk about what Scarborough's done thus far. The Parks and Conservation Land Board was created in 2001 to develop an objective evaluation process to evaluate land and make recommendations to the town using land bond funds. The impetus for its creation was a series of 4 reports you can see on this timeline here that showed that investing in conservation land was supported by the community, cheaper than building, and predictive of land values in the future and land quality. So as you can see by the timeline on this slide, the first referendum actually occurred before the Parks and Conservation Land Board completed its acquisition evaluation. And since then, there's been 3 other bonds. The full packet, if you want detail about the background of any of these reports and conservation suggestions or objectives of those reports, it's in the link on the agenda. So, slide 2. So the Parks and Conservation Land Board was to develop a process using all the available information statewide and locally regarding conservation. And we were influenced by the open space plan to use a point system to recommend and advise the council on potential purchases. We developed that process and the report was adopted in 2003. Here it is. We are currently now going over it and reviewing it since it's kind of old. We were also charged with recommending any conditions, restrictions or protective measures that were needed to protect the community's interests in properties since the town is spending money on them. We were not charged with acquiring properties or even looking for properties. So this is what the our process looks like. The property owner, you can't really see it up there, but the land trust or the main farmland trust or the property owner brings a property to us. There's an application process. We go through a preliminary assessment. Just a quick checklist. Basically, this process was developed. Well, we believe it's important and it's a rigorous one based on the state programming beginning with Habitat, which Noah already talked about. The key components of the beginning with Habitat program are what's important: large block habitats, riparian habitats that which the highest number of species depend upon, connections to conserved lands, and then working farmland. So we prepared this really detailed assessment. Sometimes we do a property visit, and then we discuss the budget. The chair writes a recommendation to the town council. The score, just so you know, is not a determinative of the recommendation, but it informs whether or not this property is important. This next slide, really? This slide shows a 4 local referendum that Scarborough had along with the dollar amounts approved by the voters and the actual vote counts. 2 things to note here. First, the first referendum was supported 75%. And secondly, the first 3 were in presidential years. So, went up quick on that one. Okay, here's the good part. Over 1,300 acres of land have been protected using Scarborough Land Bond money. And I separated into 4 increments. It's interesting that 2 of those increments are much larger periods where there was bonded. But again, bonded doesn't necessarily mean approved either, because, you know, as you counselors know, bonding can be, you know, set aside for a few years or whatever. It's not at the time of purchase necessarily. If anybody's interested in details of this, they're also in the packet. On to this, these are the properties that were preserved. The Fuller Farm was an appropriation. A lot of people ask that question, but the rest of these were preserved with land bond money. Over 1,000 acres, which is great. But the important part in this slide is that we got a 41% match. So the town of Scarborough taxpayers might have spent $5.9 million on these projects, but they were matched with private dollars or other dollars raised by the land trust or whoever the owner of the property is. Oh boy, woo, this is quick. Okay, so now we're at the end. If the town council would like to see some quick wins for conservation, I can tell you this: there are some things in the previous open space plan that haven't been adopted yet. A lot of it has been, which is great. I won't go into it, but there are a few things that we could go back to, or you could do a new open space plan, which is what I would encourage. There are also transfer of properties. You're going to have some in a few weeks. There are some properties we evaluated, like Tibbetts Road, that we made a recommendation, but a previous council did not did not purchase it, or excuse me, put it under easement, permanently protect it. So we're at 2023. We want to get to a goal of 30% land protected by 2030. There's certain town council actions that in general we think might be needed, and you can read them there since I don't have much time. But funding a land fund with yearly appropriations is something that was recommended a long, long time ago, and we still think it's important. Formalizing the recreational fees for developers is another, and properties that are not fully protected. There's a lot of land that's set aside in open space developments that is not permanently protected, and changes made in ordinances in further years down the line could make those properties, they could be built on. Contract zones, the same thing. Things can change. We have huge Piper Shores and they have a lot of open space, but guess what? They might come back and they might want to put some more homes on it. So that can be protected. Those are quick wins. And then here's some barriers. I think that's about it. Like I said, the tools, some of them have already been suggested and some of them haven't been, but I think it's doable.
Great segue and building on what Sue's recommendations are, I'd like to talk about a framework for you all on how to think about this. So it's a significant leap to go from to conserve 4,030 acres in 7 years' time, when in the last 10 years alone, it's about 424 acres, split a little bit between Scarborough Land Trust properties and private conservation easements on farms. So how do you do this? This is a framework that many organizations use to tackle a very significant goal using 4 disciplines, where you're focusing on a critical goal, you're acting on leading measures, you're keeping a compelling scorecard, and creating a cadence of accountability. So our critical goal here is to support the 30 by 30 initiative so that we're conserving at least 30% of Scarborough's land by 2030. You have created this as your goal, and we shared with you in a packet a draft resolution, which we respectfully request of the town council to resolve to put all measures that you have forward to conserve at least 30% of Scarborough's land by 2030. The next is acting on leading measures, which is essentially what are the key steps or actions that you need to take to be able to reach this goal. An analogy is New Year's resolution to lose 10 pounds, and you don't get on the scale in February and March and say, oh, did I lose a pound or two? The way to do it is, what are your leading measures? You've got to eat right, you have to exercise, you have to get your 10,000 steps in, you got to get your sleep in. So this is that sort of equivalent. What are the things that we need to be able to do to get to this goal? We need to urgently start buying land now. We need to enact an open space plan. It's been mentioned a couple times throughout our presentation so far around how we prioritize those parcels Noah showed blocks. Sue mentioned a now almost quarter-century old open space plan, which is the last time Scarborough's had one. It's now time to have one and to enact it. And develop funding sources. Look, we mentioned also a bond measure. We can increase impact fees that are meant specifically for conservation. We can actually, having a bold goal like 30 by 30 attracts donors. Donors can make gifts to municipalities. And we can entertain donations of land. And as we've mentioned here before, there are state and federal matching funds. And then we need to upgrade our ordinances. We have several ordinances that are old, but we want to also bring in new ones like coastal resilience standards and other examples. And we've mentioned earlier conservation principles. They're in your packet. What are the conservation principles for the planning process? We need to start integrating those. The next discipline is to keep a compelling scorecard. And this is something where everyone's going to be made aware of. How are we doing across this? How many acres of total land have we conserved? What is the amount of contiguous land? How much funding have we acquired for conservation? What are the number of planning projects that are incorporating conservation principles? And what are the open space plan recommendations that we've implemented? Making those public. Perhaps a dashboard that sits on your agenda that comes forward in reports is in other publicly available places. And then finally, the fourth discipline is creating a cadence of accountability. This is when we're asking everyone to take a lift and carry this forward to be able to achieve this very important goal. And here we need more than the Conservation Commission, more than the Parks and Conservation Land Board involved. We're actually suggesting that you appoint an open space planning committee to get this open space plan done. Appoint a land issues committee. There are towns in Maine that have a land issues committee that incorporates and involves different members of different committees like Conservation Planning Board, Parks and Conservation Land Board. A representative from the Land Trust could be on this land issues committee, whose purpose is it is to go identify and start to recommend acquisition of properties. We need to enhance the planning process to incorporate conservation, see an annual 30 by 30 report, and very importantly, bring in all the partners, residents who are farmers and other residents who are interested in making conservation easements, nonprofit organizations, and of course, our state and federal partners. So I have this handout for everyone, pass it, and there's enough for all the counselors as well. But this is, it's time for urgent action and for us to make investments of time, talent, and funding in order to reach this goal. You've helped Scarborough be a leader for growth and development, and now you can establish Scarborough as the leader for conservation in the state of Maine. It's time we protect our forests, fields, and farms, our rivers, creeks, and waterways, and all the natural resources in Scarborough that are so valuable to us and to our environment. We're actually at a point where we can either protect or destroy the nature that produced us, and we know where our residents stand on that. And tonight we look forward to our discussion where we can align all of us here with this goal. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and we welcome conversation, questions, and discussion.
Great. Thank you all so much for your very informative presentation. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the council. If anybody has any questions, Mrs. Katarina.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I have a quick question. I did find answers really well. It's probably just me. So we have a target of 9,421 acres. Is that correct? Conserved
Yes, correct.
and conserved.
That's
acres
30%.
As of now is 5391.
Yes,
Does that include the marsh?
Jamie.
They'll go look at Jamie.
Yes, it
Okay,
does.
so that includes all the land around the marsh too, okay? And my other question, can I just go down
Yeah.
to my questions? Because as you were talking, I was writing questions. I noted in the red markings you had, Noah, your little boxes, at first took me a minute to find those too. But it didn't look like you had the Red Brook watershed fully marked. And of course, I live on the Red Brook, so that's a passion of mine. So I just wanted to make sure we emphasize that also in North Scarborough. The other questions are, how often does the land board meet? And if I'm correct in that, that's as needed, is that right?
By the ordinance, it's quarterly. And
Have you been meeting quarterly?
we have recently, we haven't in the past, but we have recently been meeting way more than quarterly. We've been meeting once or twice a month for the last year.
Okay,
So
and that's
because,
gonna continue as part of it?
well, our quarterly meetings are scheduled. And then as needed when properties come to us.
Okay. And then you guys have a scoring system for the land. And I guess I don't need to know, but the scores, you said that this point system is gonna be revamped. 'Cause I know
Well,
there's
the
been
whole
some-
process,
there's
yeah,
been some questions and criticism of it, so
yeah.
that's why.
Can you share what criticisms you've heard?
Yeah, that they're not really up to date and they're, 20 years old and aren't based on GIS and this. that, and
So
other
the,
thing,
so the maps are, all of the maps have been updated to the current maps. There hasn't been great, huge change. And this point system that we have, we looked at a bunch of different communities in the state of Maine, and it's the most rigorous evaluation process of any. And that is a complaint of some people that it's too rigorous.
Mhm.
However, we have found in the past that we can get it done in one meeting. So particularly, we've had a lot of help with GIS
Mhm.
this year, which we never had before, and we never had a staff member. Thank you, Todd, if he's here.
It's right behind you.
And that also has changed, and that has made a huge difference on what we can accomplish. And so I would say that, yeah, we're in the process of reviewing the whole process. There's strong opinions on either side, but we're gonna reach a good decision, and we'll help you go
Okay, good.
forward. Yeah.
And then my last one is money. How much money has been estimated that's required to acquire the acreage that you guys want to see in the next 7 years? Anybody looked at that?
It's an impossible figure, right?
Right.
Because partners, I mean, so that could be answered if the town was just gonna buy it all.
Mhm.
That's an answer. But given that this can only be accomplished with many partners, with
Mhm.
resources coming from around, it's an impossible answer right now. And with property values changing, and property values differ from Higgins Beach
Right.
to Western Scarborough. You know, so.
But
Yeah,
no one sat down and tried to come up with some sort of a figure.
no, there is no
Okay.
figure being like, we need $20 million. There's no answer
Okay,
to that right
All right.
now.
that's it for my questions. Thank you.
Counselor Hamel?
Thank you. Thanks. This is very helpful. It's great to see the work that you've done and to have all of you here together to talk to this important topic. I'm very excited about it because I think that this is strategically one of the things that's going to help us try to get our arms around growth and development and to try to slow that down and to try to compete with, land that we may be trying to sell or set aside or for additional housing or other development. But I know there are tremendous demands, both directions. So my question, I have a couple questions. One is, I will make a comment first. I thought we were farther along, when I saw the 17%, it seemed like we would be farther along than we are by now. So how much, we've talked about how much land is developable left in Scarborough. And so how much land is actually left, would you say, in terms of percentage that could be preserved? Do you have any idea on that? Is it,
Yeah, so that's what the open space plan can help us with. If you were to ask us, what are the first 3 properties you would want to acquire? We could have suggestions, but the open space plan would get us to that answer. That's why we feel that something like that is so urgent.
Thank you. Another question that I had is related to this is sort of, I liked your slide that showed the snow plow trying to plow snow on Route 1, which I drive every day, near Ann John's. This past Saturday, there was a giant crane there early as I was heading to a golf course. And I'm guessing they were working on the culvert there. The past couple days this week, we've had 10-foot tides, not a lot of rain, but 9 or all close to 10-foot tides. And the water's right at the edge of the road. So how much have you taken into account the loss of land due to sea level rise? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm gonna jump with a real quick thought. Flood properties that will help absorb flood waters are properties such as marshes or riparian areas that are next to streams. We have a resource protection zone and we also have a stream protection zone. One is 250 feet away from a stream. One is only 75 feet. One of the things that the town could do is adopt a 250-foot zone around all of those instead of a 75-foot. That would protect the areas that actually are going to be inundated with water. That's just one suggestion, but there's more.
Pete's the state.
Pete, yeah, he's a geologist, right?
In this question.
I don't have this listed on top of my head, but I can get it to you in terms of different scenarios and at the lower boundary of the basically the salt marsh. The marsh is there basically to protect a lot of Scarborough. And it's gonna take the brunt of sea level rise up to a certain point. So I can get you some statistics on how much of the marsh potentially would be lost or converted to open water, as you could say, on just a different sea level rise on top of the highest of the year. So I can get those numbers to you. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Thank you. Also want to thank you for all the work that you've done with the flood maps and FEMA maps and that's over the years. And in particular, where we live on Bay Street in Pine Point, we're actually on a bit of an island in spite of all of the water coming in from the ocean and also from the marsh. So thank you for that. A lucky break. What's the most important thing we can do as a council to help you this year? Final question.
That's great.
The single most important thing we can do between now and November.
Now
We need, we need to
need another
acquire conservation, we need to acquire land for conservation.
Right,
Period.
yeah.
I mean, it's period. And the town has to be one of the tools, one of the agents in acquiring land for conservation. Not the only, for sure, but have a role in it. Not only rely on the land trust as the single agent, or not only the state or Rachel Carson. Town has to play a role in it. And you as counselors, you decide things like the land bond, like, do you want to spend it? You guys are the sole decision makers on that. So to me,
Can I
that's,
jump in for a second? I think one of the most important things is passing a resolve to keep that issue forefront. And then, Randy laid out a lot of the steps on what to do after that. And I think following up on the resolve is really, really important. But the first step, one of the most important steps is to actually say, you know what, this is an issue that we really care about and we want to set, as a goal for a future. And I think it's really important to point out 30 by 30, if you read the language carefully, we kind of structured this in some of the language of the resolve. It says at least 30%, because that's considered the bare minimum to maintain biodiversity, to maintain habitat, all the things. So, it's a great goal to have. We don't want to just think about it as the only goal.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
And in addition to what Pete just said, I pointed out in the referendums, the kind of support that we had from the community was so great in the presidential elections. Well, we're having one in a year and a half in 2024. And to be honest with you, in my opinion, and we haven't really discussed this as a vote or anything, but we're going to need another land bond. And even though there's maybe 2 million, you know how quick that can go? That can go like this. One coastal property like Benjamin Farm or something, boom, gone. And the land trust will tell you it's opportunity will pass you by if you don't have the money ready to go. So, I mean, with sort of a goal as doing the 30 by 30 and maybe an open space plan, also you just have to be thinking of a year and a half is when you want to probably do another referendum. And I know there's all these referendums for these other things, but that's the other thing I want you guys to take a look at. How much we spend on buildings or on other types of infrastructure and what is important in Scarborough, because $20 million sounds huge if we say that's what we want. We want $20 million, but to be honest with you, the buildings are millions of dollars as well. And so you can't go cheap on this. I'm just saying, I'm not saying it is 20 million, what Noah said, but I'm saying that it's possible we need to sort of up our game if we want to get there.
Well, that's why I asked about money, because
Yeah.
it's all about the money, to be honest with you, because you've got private land rights, people have land rights. And as a counselor, I'm really reluctant to take people's land rights away without some sort of compensation. So
Yep.
that's why I was curious whether you guys have looked at the monetary part of it, because it helps us when we're trying to decide if we're going to do a land bond referendum, what it is. And I know the past referenda, if I'm recalling correctly, we're pretty much, well, I shouldn't say pretty much, we're geared around certain acquisitions or kickstarted because of certain acquisitions. So there was never much money left. So if I'm correct in my memory.
That's not quite true. There was always in the back of your mind that there was the Pleasant Hill Preserve that we wanted, the
Right.
Benjamin Farm, and so we waited on that. But it wasn't, the referendums weren't necessarily geared around one property.
Okay. Because I'm the only ones I'm thinking of.
Although now that the land trust has staff, they're gearing up as well. And so they've got 11 projects in their path. So, you know, I don't know how fast the money will go, but
I can tell you with the most recent land bond, the one we currently still have funds for, there were no specific projects mentioned. And I remember there was a lot of discussion around, is it correct to go to the voters without kind of some urgency or to some definition as to what we're doing? And luckily the cooler heads prevailed and it went to the voters and had resounding success in spite of the fact that there was no particular project in the end.
Counselor Seifer?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to throw one more thing out there, and this is partially by memory. I think we mentioned that over the last 10 years, Scarborough's conserved about 400 acres, roughly. And I think somewhere, I know I read this when I looked through the packet, we had 1,700 acres, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it's 1,100 acres, I don't remember, of land. 1781. Okay, that's about 24%.
Right.
25% roughly. So if you think about it, we're not that far off, but we just have to maintain that percentage or increase it. But we have to increase it, number one. I think we have to maintain it or go over and above what we've been doing. So we're close when you think about it. We've done 400 and 1781, it's a little bit, yeah, it's about 25%. So shooting for that 30% adds about 5% to that, but you know, just wanted to throw that out there.
You're
Sorry.
talking about future, like future
yeah.
development, the balance of that. We have a deficit that we first have to make
Right,
up.
we have a deficit first, but we're not 5% is what I'm saying. In terms of what's been developed over the last 10 years versus what's been conserved. We're close, we're in the ballpark.
and talking about money, just so you know, and we're all volunteers, but the land board has never had any budget at all for anything. And we've had some discussions recently about putting together a really nice report that actually talks about all of the successes. It wouldn't be an annual report, but it would be a 10-year report or a 20-year report that says, this is what we've done, this is what we've protected, and so that the community can see. And then, you know, we could even put what the economic values to the citizens has been. And then we put together this whole thing before the referendum. But that, I think when people understand that their own property values are greater because of conservation, you know, it's money in their pocket.
Counselor Seifer?
So Dawn led with or ended with the home run question, you know, in terms of what's the thing you need council to do the most. But I'll bring us back to some questions that I had while you guys were going through your presentation, which was fantastic, by the way. Super accessible. You know, I think anyone who's watching who, you know, cares about this topic is able to gain so much information from you, and your knowledge is so apparent. So one question I have is, to Noah's point, that we're going to need a lot of partners. And so as a landowner in Scarborough, what is kind of the minimum criteria or a message that we could give to residents that would let them know that they may not own 40 acres, you know, but they maybe border a conservation property, or they have 5 or 6 acres that, you know, they're not interested in developing. Like, I know that there was a workshop at the library to kind of inform residents about what their options were. But I feel like most people watching this, if you have, you know, 3 or 4 acres, you think, oh, I can't really make an impact here. But I would challenge that assumption, because we're going to need a lot of partners. And so what can we do to kind of
inform the public or inform property owners in Scarborough, you know, what are the key things that maybe you guys would be looking for?
Scott?
I can talk a little bit about that. So as conservation director, I go out and speak with landowners all the time. I'm meeting with landowners and talking with them about what we do at the Land Trust, what our priorities are, what we look for in parcels. So, you know, we look for things that Noah already brought up, you know, connectivity to other parcels, size is definitely to an advantage to have larger sizes that will support more wildlife and more types of wildlife, more diversity of wildlife. But we're also looking for areas that will protect water resources, like Sue kind of brought up. So we're looking at riparian areas, wetlands, you know, connections to the marsh, because the marsh is really one of the priority ecological communities within the state. So anything that we can protect around the marsh is really a win for the marsh. And that really doesn't have much of a bearing on size. You know, anything that's connecting to the marshes would be a great one. And we're looking for wildlife, for areas that wildlife are beneficial for. So really, like, wetlands are great, but also the uplands surrounding a wetland. So if you're next to a wetland, you know, that's great to protect the wetland, but the animals that are surviving in those wetlands need those upland areas as well to survive. So if you're bordering a wetland, that can be very beneficial to protecting that wetland. And then we're also looking for people, because our slogan is not just for wild, you know, we look for wildlife, water, but also for people that, you know, so any types of connectivity for trails, if there's even just a small piece that is in your backyard, but maybe it connects to a larger network, a potential trail network that could connect larger conserved areas, that would be a wonderful addition, because you know, it gives you the benefit as the landowner to be able to walk out your back door, and instead of having to drive to a preserve and park and then go out and walk and then drive back, you can go out your back door and walk out, hook up on a trail and go, you know, ideally what we'd love to see is to go miles, you know, maybe even go across town. So I think there's those opportunities with smaller parcels if we can connect them somehow to a larger vision.
And if I could add, in addition to these smaller parcels, property owners with large properties like farms can put their farms into conservation easement. We have examples of that already in Scarborough. And then developers who are purchasing hundreds of acres and building. This isn't about stopping that kind of development. Development brings good things to our lives and benefits. And development also brings affordable housing. But we need to make certain that we have expectations about how they build, that we limit how much land that they are clear cutting so that we can increase the contiguous forest and land, that we increase replanting requirements is another thing. We increase the impact fees and put it into a land conservation fund. So there's other property owners that can contribute to this in more significant ways as well.
I don't know if this happens at the planning department or not anymore, because I don't know the people as well as I used to years ago. But I don't know if it's required, but it would be great if the first thing that happens when someone says, you know, they're planning for a subdivision is that they require the person to connect with the land trust or connect with maybe this new committee.
Yeah.
The lands issues committee, if that's what it is, or whatever, to say, you know, hey, that parcel, if you develop over here, you may be able to connect over there. Those discussions should happen at the beginning of a development and not at the not when they've already drawn their 25 houses, because after that, it ends up being a monetary issue for them to do it. So if there could be some way, you asked about how you could help. I don't know who's the ordinance chair, but that might be something that you could look at as far as planning goes.
Yeah, and I also think that in terms of the messaging, public education is
Yeah,
gonna be really, really, really important. If it becomes a known goal for the town that 30 by 30 is something we're shooting for, maybe
Yeah.
people with those 3 or 4 acres would think about it and then look at the mechanisms they have for themselves under their, available to them to try to achieve those things. So a lot of people probably don't even know those mechanisms exist to preserve or conserve land on their properties. It's mostly people that are active or interested, but the vast majority of people probably who are property owners may not even know some of these mechanisms exist for preserving land. So I think public education is going to be really, really key.
And they're getting market value. That's really important. They're getting market value. There's not, unless they want to donate, they're getting the value of their land. So that's really important. People think that we're taking land and we're not. It's,
Oh, I think that education piece,
Mhm.
is huge. Because I just think most people, if they're anything like me, you think, oh, my parcel's too small. They're looking for open farms and, all of this biodiversity and whatever, but it might be entirely possible that people who are sitting on 3 or 4 acres of land out in West Scarborough are exactly who we're trying to talk to.
That's the reality of
Yeah.
the future of
How we're
conservation
gonna
in
piece
Scarborough.
this together, yeah.
There aren't 400 and 500 acre parcels
Right.
that are going to be considered. That doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It's going to be happening in parcels that are less than 20 acres. But trying to do that in a really thoughtful, premeditative way where, yeah, you, your neighbor and the other neighbor are going to get together and do it simultaneously so that there is this permanently contiguous section conserved together. And oh, well, look, it's also at the headwaters of the Nonsuch River or what have you. And that has incredible value, even though if the sum of it is 15 acres.
Yeah, the town has had a transfer of development rights ordinance for a while. It's just not really been implemented that much.
It has not.
So
only been used once. as far
And,
as I know.
and that is something that, I think the Conservation Commission is going to be reviewing a bit more frequently because it's required in ordinance that, that town council review it annually. So it's another piece that will help. And on, Sue's point about, having conservation be part of the conversation on site plan review or before these pieces come up. We've talked about that at Conservation Commission. We've developed the beginning of a process. And what would be lovely is that it starts to be more of a formal part of the process, that the conservation conversation happens up front, as you're saying. And there's the support of the town council, and certainly the planning, the entire planning team is supportive as well. So, and just a moment to appreciate the staff who are supporting both of the committees and helping us with all the facts and figures that we got ready. Jamie Fitch has been fantastic. Todd Souza's great, and just a special appreciation for them.
Any other questions, Counselor Seither? Are you okay if I ask questions? Yeah, okay. So again, thank you guys. And, I just want to say I'm supportive of a resolution, and I would hope that the rest of the council would support something. I know you guys provided an example in the packet. I think that's a good way to start the conversation and start maybe more of the education that we could work with the comms committee, maybe to kind of think about as we do this resolution, how does that turn into a public education activity to really help share some of the things? Because I'm interested myself to learn a little bit. I have a quarter of an acre, so I don't think there's much I can do. But, for others, I think it would be helpful to know. I could donate.
Plant a tree, plant a tree.
I will plant a tree.
No.
I want to follow up, Noah, with something you said, because I want to understand a little bit better what you meant when you said that the town needs to be a better agent, because we quickly jumped to financials and funding, and I just want to make sure it's not just providing funds for partners to be able to use. Are there other things specifically that the town could do more of proactively that perhaps we're not doing that you didn't get a chance to kind of dig a little deeper on?
Yeah. Who's leading this idea? Where does it come from? Who organizes a goal? Let's say that you as a council decide to support this resolution. Okay. Then once that's voted on and you've approved it, what next? It can't just go to the ethers and say, somebody has to champion it. And the town should be that champion in my view. And so it would then be up to you all to think about what's the structure that we want to create to lead that partnership
Mhm.
and that conversation.
So is this kind of where the open space committee could potentially be the mechanism that we say, we're gonna appoint this committee officially to kind of lead the charge and move the plan and other things forward?
That would be great. That's certainly one idea for
Mhm.
sure. And really thinking carefully about who's on that committee.
Mhm.
You know, so a mixture of folks that are currently seated on committees, a mixture with folks that currently work for the town and understand the whole process, the land trust, possibly somebody who works for IFNW, Rachel Carson. Yeah, so really the infrastructure starting with the town and the town keeping the conversation going, which is different than saying the town has to pay for everything.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point. One of the things I was thinking specifically, because I see Angela here and I see Todd here, and I was on the transportation committee and on the former the Parks and Recs board that recently did their Parks and Facilities Master Plan. And everybody's talking about the idea of contiguous land and trails to be able to help with mobility, recreation, conservation. So I really like the idea of like almost like a subcommittee of committees that pulls in all those different perspectives, because I think all of those perspectives together, I think could hopefully help us focus a lot of the committees on very specific actions. The contiguous option of like being able to eventually be able to get around Scarborough through walking trails to maybe ultimately get to Eastern Trail or something. To me, that will help with traffic. It will help with, you know, recreational things that people want to do. So I really like that concept from your principles. Like that's the one that resonates with me most, is trying to figure out or use that as like one of the primary guiding principles. Because I think the challenge that we're going to have that you also mentioned was there aren't big acres to purchase. So if we're going to create an open space plan, I'd love to kind of see it thinking about how do we actually get people around Scarborough so that way they can get to, you know, different places. And, you know, we're being thoughtful about how to make those connections where it could just be 3 acres in one property. That may be what we need to connect these parcels together that create, you know, a much more contiguous pathway for people. With the financial element, you know, I'm really interested, and I don't know if you guys have other ideas. And Sue, you had mentioned in the past, we had talked about, or maybe the town or the council had explored yearly appropriations. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about what that's intended, because while bonds, I think, are definitely something we could pursue, I'd like to see us not just rely on bonds. I'd like to see us think through other things. Like, is there an annual appropriation we should be considering? Or you guys have mentioned impact fees. I remember when we've talked to some folks around development, you know, I was trying to look into like environmental impact fees. And I don't think we have anything today, right? That's around conservation.
No.
And I was trying to research it to see what other communities may have, and I couldn't find anything. So I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
in your research have
Yes,
seen.
we do.
Okay,
Several other towns in Maine have conservation sequestered impact fees, certainly.
And they call them open space, I think, fees.
open space
I,
fees.
I think so. I'm not really sure, but the state law allows for that.
Okay,
It has to be based upon, you know, real numbers.
that's probably where we would need an. open
Seems to
space.
me that I have some data. Cumberland has them.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
you know, it's just sort of like the traffic impact fees that you
But
guys
it's fair
have.
to say they're not widespread. They're fairly unique in Maine.
I think it would be like, this is where I think the open space plan is like such a critical element of all of this, because I see that as a guide in decision making, but also if we do want to go the impact fee path, I think it helps to justify whatever the fees are we want to charge. And I know in the budget this year, Tom had put it in there, but not as a funded option. And I know the finance committee talked a little bit about that, and Councilor Shupee, you're pretty vocal about wanting to try and find a way to kind of get that in. And I just want to express my support for
Right.
trying to get that, find a way to get that into the budget. I think it's a worthwhile investment, and I think it's a necessary one to truly like deliver this, especially in a way that we can keep that scorecard and make sure that we're making smart choices.
Right.
So I just want to say, I think, you know, resolution, I think, is something I would support. Some sort of subcommittee or committees to like work through this open space plan and potentially hopefully funding that this year to start that process, and then think longer term about funding. What is the right structure between bonds, impact fees, annual appropriations, or things that could help us execute the plan?
Right.
The one thing that one of the reasons why I put some of the older reports in was because it's really important, and your attorney will tell you this, that your impact fees are based upon data, and the data that you get are going to be your cost of services. So we haven't done a cost of services report or whatever in a very, very long time. That's another thing that really needs to be a budgeted item. I have no idea how much that would cost, but it's not $1,158 per house. It's probably a lot more than that, because, you know, it's so old. So just keep that in mind, whether the open space committee deals with that or not, or if that's a council thing that's separate. It's going to be needed if you're going to look at impact fees at all.
Councilor Katarina?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I'm looking at this strategy sheet here. I don't know who developed this, but what the heck's a land issues committee?
That's the committee that comprises representatives from different committees, plus perhaps a member of the Scarborough Land Trust and other partners that look at and focus on parcels to purchase that for the town. Yeah,
For conservation.
for conservation.
All right.
You,
Could call it something else.
Well, I'm not one that's real big on a committee for everything. That's why I'm like, what are we doing here? Because you got open space committee, land issues, and then we got sustainability, and then we got conservation, we got whatever. So, you know, if we could be more precise or whatever, anyway, that's something we can deal with.
Yeah,
as a council.
I think
I was just curious.
efficient and precise is excellent. We, as Noah said, we need a lead on who in the town is going to be looking for these properties that are prioritized through an open space plan and bringing them to Parks and Land Conservation Board for acquisition. That doesn't exist right now. So one mechanism is a land issues committee that includes a combination of staff, volunteers, and community partners. Maybe it's maybe you say, let's hire a staff person who's focused clearly on that.
Can the Conservation Commission take that on?
I do not believe that should be only a volunteer position. Conservation Commission are all volunteers.
No, but I'm talking about this committee, so-called committee things.
Oh, the committee, yes. Yes,
Okay. Thanks.
right?
So the-
Sorry, I put you on the spot. I used to be on the Conservation Commission. That's why I wanted.
The other thing, the other piece of that, I guess, is that one message we want to share here, and I think everyone's getting, is that conservation can't be just a Conservation Commission issue, right? So when something like land issues or land purchase comes up, let's look across all of our resources in town, all the committees, our community partners, and the staff as how we share that. And it's not assigning to just the one committee or assigning to the same staff person who gets all of these pieces to follow up on. But it's lifted up in terms of your resolution and across the board scorecard and lead measures that everyone carries this together. So yes, the Conservation Commission can take it, but are we all in on it?
I'm not sold.
Can I flip the question around? Let's look at this maybe in an alternative way where you decide to support a resolution. And then it's your charge to to decide how do we, as a town, identify parcels to purchase? So how would, so would, what would you do? Would you charge a staff member? Would you charge multiple staff members that work in different departments? What do you think?
Well, that's why I don't know. I can tell you right now, I really don't know. I know in the past, it's been Scarborough Land Trust has pretty much come to us with, you know, they've identified parcels and whatever, and have come to us and said, you know, what can we do about this?
Yeah, and so that would be a failure of this process to say that we have to shove this entire to the land trust. The land trust in its history, which I think is from the late 1970s was when it was founded, has conserved around 1,600 acres. So that's a long period of time. It's very effective. But to then say in the next 7 years, we need you to conserve 4,000 acres is an impossible task.
But no, quite frankly, how do you expect us to do that?
Yeah.
It seems, I fear that, and let me say that I fully support this for all the reasons that have been discussed tonight, but I'm also trying to be realistic. It's not, I don't see how it's practically possible to do that in 7 years.
Right.
So I just fear that we're in part setting ourselves up for failure or disappointment. That's not to say we shouldn't try, and we've got to start tomorrow, frankly, trying harder. I mean, Scott, you mentioned you have 11 properties owners you're talking to. I dare say, I'm guessing one or more of them, you probably started that conversation 10 years ago, and they continue.
Right.
Yeah.
And I heard Andrew Mackey take the podium and say, we work with willing landowners. We don't force ourselves upon them. So those things take time. So for us to make this sort of commitment and meet that sort of goal, it requires a radically different approach.
Absolutely.
Well, I think
That's why we're
So
here.
you're suggesting taking land?
No,
No, nobody's ever
never.
said take
No one
land.
at this table has
I'm just
ever said
trying-
that.
I don't mean to be argumentative. I'm just saying, how can we possibly do that in 7 years?
Yeah.
I think we have a group of volunteers who are saying they want to help us do that. And so I will say I am supportive of creating the subcommittees because I personally feel like the Conservation Commission should be focusing on the beginning process of the planning process. And so I think the subcommittees is great. I'm looking at a group of people and I did not know about these committees. I think there are people here tonight who want to serve on these committees and specifically work on this task. And I think we could probably get more people to be involved and focus on that. And that also kind of gets the word out there because we're creating a new committee. I personally like committees. I think we have a lot of people and you can stay focused on it if you bring them all back together. I 100% support the resolution. I think that's a great way to take the first step. I think, continuing to support the open space plan, make sure it's in the budget is really how we're going to really start this. And it also gets the word out there. The Transportation Committee created a subcommittee, which is going to be working on connectivity. Specifically, they are working on how do we connect all the trails. I feel like an open space plan is also going to be very beneficial to that committee as well as to this goal here, because connectivity was also one of our goals. And so then I also support further down the line doing a land bond because it says we don't know where the land is yet, but as a whole, we consider this a priority and we want to put money aside. How much money? Let's see how much people want to put aside and put towards conservation. So when that opportunity does come up, we're ready.
I'm just, as you were talking, what would be really interesting to do, and again, maybe this is something for the communications committee to consider. We're doing, sorry.
Yeah, we're doing that.
So we're
Wow.
we're redoing our community survey. And I think that might be a good mechanism, to your point, to kind of assess willingness, interest in supporting something. And even using that as like a litmus for, financial sensitivity for, is it 2 million, 10 million, 20 million? Knowing that, when we bond, it doesn't mean we're spending that money right away. We're setting it aside. So doesn't mean we're gonna all of a sudden put $20 million in debt. It's gonna be there available that we can have. Because it seems like if we could understand what people are willing to pay, given this, I think that the financial piece seems like a real barrier to that goal that you mentioned, Tom. I think if we don't have the money where we can say we can do it, then I don't think people will take it seriously. So I think, to me, making sure we understand and figure out what's the general sentiment of the public and a willingness to do this as an early indicator to help further define, what we would want to set aside. I think that's going to be critical to meet the goal and do it as fast as we can. I also think, this, it's a stretch goal. It's okay. Like, I'm not afraid of stretch goals. So let's do our best. Let's make the commitment. Let's see what we can do. And I love scorecards. I love measuring things. And so we're going to have to do that and make sure that we know how we're performing. And, if we don't achieve it, then we just continue at it and try and continue to conserve as fast as we can. Counselor Scyther?
So what I'm hearing, I mean, obviously I hear the concerns that, we're asking for something radical here, but I'm also hearing really valid points about maybe the right group of people have not yet been assembled. That there are community partners and relationships that have not been a focused group of people that we have brought together for specifically this goal. And so if the charge of this committee is more focused and more specific to this conservation goal, to this identification of land, to this, how much money do we need, all of these kind of big picture questions that we're asking, that hasn't been the charge of the Conservation Commission up to this point. And so asking them to now take that on, we are doing a disservice to the task by not seeking people who are really energized by the task. And so I think that we could really, bring an effective subcommittee together around this. And I support that fully.
And I would say that if you told the Parks and Conservation Land Board that they should go out and identify, that you would lose a lot of the people. I think being energized by the task is a super important idea for a committee. But there's another thing I wanted to mention. The Open Space Committee had a budget and it had a facilitator, had an outside person that came in, just like I think the recreation planning did. One thing I want to point out is where we ran into problems with the previous open space plan is in identifying very specific parcels. Landowners did not want to see their parcels identified necessarily. Now we're in a different world now. It's possible that people won't be as touchy about it, but I'm just putting that out there just so that we understand, because I think it is important, the connectivity part of it. Unless we identify those parcels, we can't. If the landowners are educated that they are getting market value for property, maybe, and they see the history of the past 20 years, which people have gotten market value, then maybe they won't be as, the landowners won't be as nervous about.
I have a quick question. When we did the last one, which I don't know if anybody was here when it.
I was on it.
You were on it?
So were some of the people that are on my committee.
How much did that particular plan engage the public to help create it? Because I feel like what we saw in the last Parks and Facilities Master Plan was a very, very good model of public engagement to shape the plan. And so to overcome.
There was.
Okay,
Yes, there was. And actually the attitude survey was done at the same time or right before the whole townwide attitude survey, which talked about not just conservation, but also schools and those kinds of things and growth. But also the conservation piece was pulled out of it. And then the open space committee was actually a committee made up of a variety of different people in the community and landowners. I can't remember, but yes, there was public participation, no question. Because we talked to a lot of landowners, and that's one of the reasons why we backed away from an overlay plan.
Can I just follow up real quick to Tom's comments? This is without question a bold objective. Without question, conserving 13% of our town over the next 6 or 7 years is a bold vision. But if you want to see bold, drive into the Downs right now. That was a bold plan. And look how quickly it's been enacted by the landowners and the town working together. Right? We see that in our town. So to me, that is a perfect example and evidence where Scarborough as a town can absolutely rally around bold objectives and bold plans that recreate the structure of who we are. If just to say, oh, this is super complicated, can't do it, it's too hard. I just personally, I don't buy that. I apologize, but I love living in Scarborough. I love going on the Eastern Trail. I love all these things, going to our beaches. I love the Fuller Farm. And I would love to see it twice as big, Fuller Farm. I'd love to see those things. I think we can do it. I genuinely, I wouldn't be here today if I didn't. We have too many kids I could be with at home.
And we can do it with leadership. When a leadership embraces this and prioritizes it and says, this is what we're going to be tracking, we're going to make sure that this is put into place. This last piece of the resolution, which we hope stays in there, is that you're calling on town leadership to increase tools and resources available to achieve locally driven conservation, facilitate collaboration and good faith conversations among other public, private, and nonprofit partners as we work together to achieve 30 by 30 and solve our nature and climate crises. The time is now.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for their time and effort and preparation and the discussion today. I want to let Counselor Shoup have the last word because I know she's been kind of the leader, as Randy mentioned, kind of behind this to really help bring this topic to the forefront. So
No, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's here tonight. I mean, these are the experts. These are the people that are here tonight because they support this goal. And that's why it was such a big goal for us, because we know that you guys are here, you support us, you're educated behind this, and you want to work with us. So thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to working with you guys.
Thanks for the opportunity.
great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Can we have slides on the shirt?
And the ones that are posted already, we need them. Gotta request.
I seriously tried myself.
You were doing well.
Right. Today is April 19th. This is the regularly scheduled 7 o'clock town council meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. Item number 2 is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, item 3 is roll call. Cody, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Counselor Snyder,
Here.
Counselor Shu,
Here.
Counselor Katarina,
Present.
Counselor Hamel,
Here.
and Chairman Anderson.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, item number 4 is general public comments. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on something that is not on the agenda? And if you're online and would like to raise your hand, please do so.
Good evening. Shannon Lindstrom, 62 Jasper Street. Last week, we had our 4th community forum around the Unified School Project, during which we reviewed the site selection process, our work in narrowing down potential sites to date, and a timeline for moving forward with selection. For anyone that missed the forum and wasn't able to attend, you can watch the recording found on the district's website and the Scarborough School Solution website. It was full of a lot of great information, and we had really excellent questions from community members that were in attendance. Next week, the Building Steering Committee will select a site for this, and the school board will vote on that site selection. This decision marks an important milestone in the development of a district-wide strategic school solution, one which has brought community members, educational experts, leaders, and Scarborough elected representatives together to build the future for our Scarborough students. Both of these meetings are open to the public via Zoom and in person, and we encourage everybody to attend. We strongly encourage everybody to attend. This is a school that will be built to serve the needs of the Scarborough of today and the growth of the Scarborough of tomorrow. It is a district-wide solution that will support Scarborough students and families with equitable educational excellence, protect our natural resources, and lower operational costs through sustainable development and energy efficient operations. And it will also build the future of our community by empowering our youngest members. Thank you to everyone here on Town Council that has shared your voice, your perspective, and your input in this design process so far. We look forward to continuing to work with you in this design and development phase. If you haven't been involved to date, for those in the community, it's never too late. No matter what your current perspective or knowledge around the project, we want everyone involved. Come to our meetings and our community forums, join a subcommittee, let us know what questions and concerns you have. We are here to listen. The more voices that are advocating for our kids, the stronger the school and the future we as a community can build for them. Head over to scarboroughschoolsolution.org for more information on the project and how to get involved. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment on something not on the agenda? All right, if you could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Mo Erickson and I live at 288 Pine Point Road. And there are a couple of things I wanted to address this evening. Well, actually, it's really one, and it's about the potential, probable, most likely, certain increase in the property taxes for the upcoming year. And I just, I guess I really wanted to just let you know that I don't like it. I don't want it. That it really, the decisions that you guys make really affect me personally and my family. I am a family of 6 and I'm of very modest means. I run a very frugal budget in my home. And when you tell me once again that my taxes are going to go up by at least another 4%, that's a lot of money for me. The mooring fees went up this year by a substantial amount. The sanitation bill went up this year. I don't need to tell you that just the regular bills of life, oil, food, they're all going up. And those things matter. So I guess I just wanted to come here to put a face to it and tell you, it really matters, these decisions that you make. And I want you to remember that. I mean, none of my children, all who are college educated, because we are frugal and push them to go to college, none of them can come back here and live in this town. Not one of them. They're not happy about that. They would love to be able to come back and live here, but they can't afford to buy anything in this town. And like I said, it matters, the decisions that you make. Not everyone is retired watching their Fidelity and Vanguard accounts just, for the fun of it. We are all working. And, I took care of a patient the other day, 78 years old. And I said, "What did you do for a living?" And she said, "I'm still working." And I said, "Are you working for fun?" And she said, "No. I'm working because I have to." And I thought, oh, dear God, I hope that's not going to be me. So I don't know. It was just a real slap in the face for me. And I just thought, I got to come here and just say, this is me. I can't be the only one in Scarborough that feels this way, but I don't see anyone else coming up here. But I just felt like I have to. And on another sort of side note, as far as the community center and a potential idea of having a pool, I wish we didn't have to have those things somehow connected with the Risbara Micho name attached to them. I don't know why we may have to do that. I really hope we don't. I don't know why we would have to rent space and rent it from a person. I don't know why the town, as wealthy as this town is, why do we have to potentially rent it from a private entity? I really hope we don't. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Erickson. All right.
Good evening, counselors. My name is John Cashmar. I actually live in Portland. I'm the executive director of the Eastern Trail. I'm speaking on behalf of Bob Hamlin, who was here earlier, but had to go to a meeting in Portland. He is a longtime chair of the Eastern Trail Alliance, our board, and now the vice chair. And he wanted me to ask the council to see if we could find some time in the future to schedule a discussion about the gap section of the Eastern Trail here in Scarborough, and that is completing it. We're very eager to do that. We would like to speak with the council about it, obviously with Tom. I've been regularly engaged with Tom, Jamie, other staff here, and we greatly appreciate that work and those efforts. Scarborough is a very important place on the trail. The gap is very important. A lot of our economic development, we know is in our economic impact rather, we know is in Scarborough from the trail because we have upwards of 5,000 people in the marsh per day at times. Very important place all around and a beautiful place. But I simply just wanted to request some time in the future for the Eastern Trail Alliance to speak with the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy Hogan, I live in Ocean View Harbor off of Black Point Road. And when my husband and I decided to move here, buy a house in Scarborough, we were very excited to see all the natural resources. And we were especially happy that we were very close to the Eastern Trail. And when we heard about the Close the Gap campaign in Scarborough to be able to connect the Eastern Trail from Scarborough to South Portland and beyond, we were excited about that and sought to learn a little bit more. We supported it in the way that we could. And then it just hasn't happened as we had hoped and expected. Over those years, we've seen a lot of other things happening in Scarborough. And so I would like to echo John's request that the council discuss where the Eastern Trail Close the Gap project is and how we can get that done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public? Right.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Conlon. I live in Biddeford. I also work for the Eastern Trail as trail manager. And just to echo what was said before me, but I'm on the trail daily, and the most question I get asked is, when is the gap going to get done? When are they going to put this through? And I know it's been years. So just to echo what they said, love to have some time to try to pursue that. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else who would like to comment on anything not on the agenda, or anybody online? If you would like to, you could raise your hand.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Kroll, and I'm the very proud director of the Scarborough Public Library. Next week is National Library Week, and the theme is There's More to the Story. It seems a fitting opportunity for me to publicly announce my intent to retire as library director this coming September. I've served the library in this position for 45 years. I started at a time when books were checked out with rubber date stamps, and the new technologies were VHS and Betamax tapes, and our new equipment was a used 16mm projector to show films. I bought the library's first electric typewriter, which had a whole half page of memory. And you might have known since then, we've added a few computers, and the internet has certainly changed the profession. We're a very different community since I started, but its heart and soul are still found at the library 45 years later. And I believe this is going to be true for the entire history of the library. We're going to be 125 years old next year. I encourage everyone to subscribe to our newsletter. It's scarboroughlibrary.org, and there you'll find more about our services, what we provide, and the many offerings that we have with other organizations that we host there. The position will be posted by the end of this week, and I look forward to promoting this dream job in a vibrant community on the beautiful coast of Maine. But I have a few more months of work to do at the helm before I get piped off. And finally, I'd like to invite all of you to join us on Wednesday at Nonesuch Brewing. We're going to have a special event, and the proceeds for the food, whether it's dine-in or takeout, will go to benefit the public library. So that's Wednesday, the 26th from 4 to 9. So there's definitely more to this story, and I look forward to the library's next chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for your service. Yes. All right, so with that, I am closing public comment, and I'm moving on to item number 5, minutes from the March 15th, 2023 Town Council meeting. Can I get a motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next item is item number 7, items to be signed, treasurer's warrants. I signed those right before the meeting. Item number 8, the town manager report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm going to ad lib slightly or reverse my order. Certainly want to recognize Nancy and her tremendous service to this community. Nancy is just certainly the face of Scarborough Public Library, but much more than that. I mean, this woman has given her life to this community and that organization in particular. It's going to certainly be different without you part of the conversation. To the issue of the Eastern Trail, I'm the one responsible, so you should be talking to me. It's landed on my lap. It's not for lack of effort. It's not for lack of commitment. It's not for lack of desire of getting that done. I'm an avid trail user myself. Unfortunately, just a bit of history with this project. Scarborough this is a locally administered project, so Scarborough is actually the lead agency. And what's hung us up for several years, more than 2 years, is the right-of-way acquisition phase. And that is due, I guess, entirely to the point, the state of Maine does not own trail systems. That's a matter of, I guess, policy. And so they're owned by local nonprofit organizations, counties, and probably more normally municipalities. And Scarborough has done its fair share, I would argue, probably more than most communities along the Eastern Trail in supporting the system that exists today. We built the bridge across the marsh, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars investment, not to mention staff resources to help support that system. So we certainly are very interested in making that commitment. Where we stand now, there was one particular landowner that was very, very difficult to work with. And we didn't have eminent domain available to us because the majority of the land actually sits in South Portland. And that's frankly something that I always hesitate even suggesting that being a means to acquire use rights. But the good news is we did finally work through those differences, have secured that final private easement, if you will. And now we're looping back to the big entities. And this project, if you can appreciate the close the gap portion, goes through a very complicated area of town. It's not virgin land. This is the industrial park of, lands on and off and around Pleasant Hill and connecting to Wainwright Fields. And so the majority of the trail in this system actually exists within an active CMP corridor. And to make matters worse, it also needs to cross a railroad track and with an elevated structure at some great expense. So much so, the structure, when you're at the crest of this bridge, you'll be looking at the same level as the high tension lines. And so, as you might expect, the utilities are very interested and concerned about safety of users. And so we've now circled back to them because we've kind of dropped away a couple of years ago as we focused on these private concerns. Not surprisingly, with the time delays, we're dealing with, in a couple of cases, some different people. So we're kind of re-educating. In the case of Pan Am, it's been sold to a new company. So there's a whole nother re-education process. We do have meetings set up for later this month and early in May to hopefully re-engage, and there are promising signs. So again, not by way of excuse, but by way of explanation, there are really intricate challenges and some serious headwinds with creating a project, particularly at this location. So our financial partners remain strong and committed, namely DOT, and we'll continue to leverage those relationships going forward. So I would certainly welcome the council being involved in a deeper conversation. I think I'm to the point where we can be a little more open about that in the right-of-way phase. For obvious reasons, we need to be fairly private in who we're dealing with in the particular terms, but I think we're kind of through that and dealing with more public entities. So I welcome the opportunity to have a deeper discussion, and I can invite other partners to help fill in the gaps. Pardon the pun. So down to some more housekeeping matters, if I could. As the council is aware, our budget process has been delayed such that your first reading is almost a month after you've received the budget. And to ensure that we have enough time for thoughtful consideration and discussion, the whole process has been moved about a month. So we're suggesting that your validation vote be on June 27th. All of these materials, incidentally, are available on the budget portal. I share them with the council this evening. Since the Finance Committee took this matter up at their meeting last week, we have put in place a budget review session or schedule, if you will, which is the front page, if you will, of the handout. These are the individual department reviews. And this has always been a bit of a flexible schedule, but we do our best to try to schedule certain departments in on certain nights. And so certainly if you're interested, I know members of the Finance Committee love to have other counselors there if you're interested in one or more of these. And on the backside is the larger master calendar that really inserts all the related dates involving the Board of Education, so on and so forth. So bear with us, but the budget process has been launched and the Finance Committee is poised to really get busy on the detailed review and discussion. Also, simple housekeeping, you might have noticed there was a crane that sat in the parking lot right outside Town Hall. That was installing Verizon Wireless's cellular service at the top of the tower. For about a month, they've been doing interior work in our operations center in the police department. I don't have I could speculate. I expect they'll be operational sometime in May and perhaps I can give some more details, but certainly encouraging to see them lift all the infrastructure to the top of the tower. And so I think the end's in sight. In terms of the Comfort Inn, I did get an update today. At this point, all residents have been provided their proper legal notice. Hearings for the last 4 are scheduled for tomorrow. And I've been advised that the expectation is that all current guests will be moved out by the end of April. So we continue to monitor that closely. I should mention March, we did see a fairly noticeable increase in calls, at least during this year. The first 2 months of the year, we averaged about 25 calls a month. And we rose to almost 50 in March. In April, we seem to be dipping back to the kind of where we were. The nature of the calls are much different. And so I think I can report that it's still manageable from our staff's point of view at this point. On the topic of innkeepers licenses, council may recall that every May is the annual renewal for innkeepers licenses. So we have that slated for May 17th. The process allows the town clerk to do certain renewals at her discretion and refer others to you at her discretion. Given certainly our experience with the Comfort Inn, and we have been tracking calls across all facilities. The council directive doesn't extend to this renewal period, but we're going to use the same 30 call standard just as a benchmark. And we expect the Comfort Inn certainly and Extended Stay America will both exceed that threshold, or actually already have. And so I expect those 2 matters will come before you. The others will be dealt with at the clerk level. Quickly, in terms of construction projects, it's the weather has turned, and so we now turn our attention to that short construction season. You might have noticed our contractors remobilized on Gorham Road. Believe it or not, we're just now starting the town portion of that project. What we've seen to date is the sewer district and Unitil doing subsurface work, replacing their lines. So the town will be moving in over the course of the next couple of months, doing full road reconstruction, curb, sidewalk, and drainage improvements. So we'll do our best to continue to manage 1-lane traffic, but if past experience is any suggestion, it's going to be challenging. So beware, but I think it'll be rewarding in the end. Our Spur Road project, this is a traffic and pedestrian safety improvement project. The final design is done. We'll be going to bid next week. We would not expect to start bid any work in the field and on the roadway until after Labor Day. Mitchell Hill Road, which is a major undertaking. This is a major reconstruction involving culvert and drainage improvements. We have awarded that bid to Grondon, and that work is going to commence around June 1st, and that's the 3 to 4 month process. That's going to be quite an undertaking. So we'll do our regular communication to make sure that the word is out and people are aware that that's going to be a challenging area for the majority of the summer. And finally, Ward Street, just across the way here. This is a short little street that is now going to be connected into the Eastern Village development. This is in coordination with the North Village part of that project, the overall project, but really driven by the North Village apartments. They'll be constructing curb, sidewalk, and putting a pedestrian signal across Route 1. And for our part, that road was in fairly rough shape. So we're doing some reconstructive work and drainage work in concert with that. So there'll be a full brand new complete paved surface and full pedestrian improvements as well. I wanted to mention, and Councilor Caterina and perhaps Councilor Hamel will remember this, in years past, a joint effort through SEDCO and the Chamber Vision Committee has held what they called an all board summit. This was an opportunity to bring all of our committees together under one roof in one room at one time and really make connections. And I think since our last one, we've, I think, done a better job with staff support to committees and kind of understanding what each is doing. But I think there's still value in getting folks together and kind of cross-pollinating, if you will. This year, I think the rallying theme will be around council goals. So I think you'll be pleased to hear that. We've selected June 8th, or they have as the date, location to be announced. My suspicions it will be at Wentworth. We just need a large enough space to handle 100 people, perhaps, or more. Might seem a bit mundane, but I think worth mentioning. The council may recall that the town manages a parking lot down at the Pine Point Co-op. I don't recall exactly how many spaces, but council's been involved in deciding designating spaces for commercial fishermen specifically and exclusively, also for trailer parking. We also have a lease for the owner of the co-op and the Stern Restaurant for the use of 25 spaces in that same lot. Those spaces are not designated, and historically we've not done so. Given some of the decisions the town's made by designating other spaces and thereby minimizing opportunities, we've been working with the property owner, understanding that the summer season is their season as well. And I took this matter up with the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee last week. As a trial period, I believe what we're going to try to do is to allow 10 spaces, not 25, but 10 to be signed for their use during certain times of the day and certain time of the season. And I think I would very much characterize this as a trial period. The Coastal Waters Committee, I think, seems committed to looking at a more global, longer term solution that probably involves metered parking of some sort, but that's a larger undertaking that we weren't ready to move forward right away with. I promised two final items. Comprehensive plan, long-awaited comprehensive plan. As of today, I did receive a letter and officially, and I quote, "It is deemed complete and consistent with the Growth Management Act." It's been long awaited, long overdue. Not yet, no. I hope. I'll be providing that to council. Karen Martin has been the one that's been picked up where Jay Chase left off and has really kind of been shepherding that through. She's offered and is preparing a memorandum that explains the process that was undertaken, the additional information that's been supplied to the state to get to this point of it being deemed consistent. And I'll certainly share with or talk with council leadership as to what next steps, if any, might be required in that regard, but look for that. And lastly, as regards the 4-day work week, at your last meeting on April 5th, I mentioned that effective May 1st, we'd be moving town hall hours Monday through Thursday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and closed to the public on Fridays. I wanted to speak a bit more to that as the day gets closer, and we've had a number of questions at the suggestion, I think very good suggestion of the communications committee. There was a frequently asked question put together. It may not ask and answer all the questions that are out there, but it's a first start. We're pleased to continue down that path as needed. But for my purposes, this has not been a quick decision. This has been something that we've been considering in some detail and with some earnest for over 6 months. And I think we're doing it for the right reasons. I'm increasingly comfortable that we're not an outlier in terms of the other communities that either have done it, some of whom have done it 15 years ago, and others are immediate neighbors that are currently considering it this summer. But first and foremost, it really was done as an HR initiative, a way to provide some incentive to our employees that's no cost, that doesn't reduce productivity. We appreciate that there's potentially customer service challenges, but we hope that with the extended hours each day and more predictable hours, we can offset those inconsistencies on Friday. I have asked Liam just to dig a little deeper, if you'll indulge us just for a few slides, just to kind of put some deeper context into what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So yeah, I think that there's clear a desire from the council and the public to better understand what's behind this proposed change in operations. And so we think that, just to provide some additional background, we've really been discussing this internally for almost a year as we've seen other communities explore 4-day work week options, Biddeford being one of the more notable ones. Their plan actually involved reducing staff hours while paying them the same. That's not consistent with our proposal. But that's really where these discussions began. We've been discussing it with internally and with some members of council dating back to last fall. Again, what's been absent is the specific plan in detail, but certainly putting it on the radar is something we were considering, as Tom said. really initially as an opportunity to look at kind of an employee attraction and retention mechanism, as we had actually lost, a pretty key member of staff for this very reason. And so I think that really kind of put the spotlight on it for us. We did attempt to forge this plan with some public input. So we did do a survey last fall. It ran for 30 days. It was advertised in our newsletter, and I have some additional information based on that survey coming up. So the kind of the external trends, as Tom referenced, Freeport, Falmouth, and Cumberland have been on a 4-day town hall schedule for almost a decade. A few of them cited actually the last economic downturn in 2008, 2009 as a justification for moving this. I think it probably did pair with some reduction in staff hours, but they kept it based on the fact that it was generally supported or accepted by the community. Biddeford and Sanford are the two larger municipalities that have moved to this in the last 12 months or so. I haven't had any candid conversations, but there hasn't seemed to be a whole lot of public pushback to the degree they're going back on their plan. And the communities, Gorham, Wyndham, and Cape Elizabeth are actually actively proposing to move in this direction as early as this spring or early summer. Again, whether that actually happens remains to be seen. What their specific plan is yet to be seen. The internal trends, just for some context, is, town hall staff have actually had the ability to work what they refer to as a summer schedule, subject to supervisor approval for years. Actually, it's one of our internal policies that allows employees to work either a 4-day work week or 4 days and a partial 5th day. Again, that goes back many, many years. Certainly predates me. Public works staff has worked a 4-day, essentially summer, although it's kind of the start and stop generally has varied a little bit, but certainly covering the summer months. They have a kind of a skeleton crew on Fridays to provide some level of service to the public, but the majority of their operation staff is on Monday through Thursday. And the police department moved to a 4-day schedule for many of the same reasons last year. Their employment competition was moving to 4-10s. They saw it as a benefit with 3 days off. And so they went in that direction, and dispatch for a very short period of time went to a 4-day work week. We just unfortunately didn't have the staffing to support that. But as they return to staffing levels, we expect them to fully explore that as well. Fire department's a whole different animal, so we won't get into that. The objectives that we set out was we actually we did have, this wasn't completely internal motivations. I mean, we have anecdotally for years heard comments from residents about difficult to get here between 8 and 4. Many of our working residents, they need to be in the office by 8 or 9 and they work till 4 or 5. And so getting in there has really been difficult. So we see this actually as an expansion of service, less Friday, but 7 to 5, Monday through Thursday, we hope will be well received from that kind of group. We've also received feedback in years past, and it's codified in the survey as well with a few comments that residents have been confused by the hours of operation. As you know, right now, the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays of the month, we have the clerk's office and revenue office open till 6 p.m. But not the planning department, not the assessing department. And so there's inconsistency there that has led to some confusion. So by moving to this, we have all 4 predominantly public facing departments open from the hours of 7 to 5, Monday through Thursday. And of course, there is the internal component, which is greater flexibility of staff schedules to include a 4-day work week. I expect there will be a number of staff who work 4 days and a partial 5th day, or perhaps 5 even days, depending on their job and what the public customer service demands are. So public input, we did conduct a survey. Again, it was to try to get a better understanding and impression from the public. We received 272 submissions, which isn't nothing. I think it's as we've looked at some scientifically valid surveys that we've done between the Parks and Facilities Master Plan and the community survey, that was, those were generally 800, 1,200 responses, and that was a much more in-depth and robust public input process. So 82% of respondents believe current hours were good or excellent. So my hope is that, we're not looking to, we're expanding that. So I hope that would grow. 5% rated the current hours as poor, and the common comments were difficulty of working around work schedules and confusion with late hours. So we hope that this plan actually addresses both of those sensitivities. So the proposal is to Monday through Thursday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Again, these are the assessing, revenue, clerks, and planning and code enforcement offices. And just some concluding thoughts from my perspective, this is, it's an attempt to actually improve accessibility to town services and work around resident schedules and daily commitments. It's intended to give staff greater opportunities for more flexible work schedules. This is a change that's generally budget neutral. We're not proposing to increase vacation time or holiday time to match what their hours might be. Staff is going to continue to be paid for a 40-hour work week. For those staff who move to a 4 10-hour day, they're actually going to be, they're entitled to a 30-minute paid lunch break. So by that math, they're actually working an additional half hour a week. And so, there certainly are some finer points that we could probably point to and drill down on, but generally this is intended to be an attempt to improve customer service, to retain and attract personnel, and do it at a no cost to the taxpayer. So one final point, residents rated municipal customer service exceptionally high with the last community survey. As we've already mentioned in the workshop this evening, we're going back out. We have no interest in seeing a decline to that satisfaction. In the event this doesn't work and it's not well received and there isn't a period of adjustment, we're not interested in eroding that confidence and support. So we're not certainly advertising this as a trial period, but of course, like all municipal decisions and management decisions, we're going to be receptive to feedback both internally and externally and adjust accordingly. But this was our best attempt with the information we had, with the objectives we had to roll out a plan.
Thank you, Liam. I'm certainly available for questions if you have any.
Are there any questions for Tom?
Not,
Counselor Seifert?
not a question, but Tom, I'm the appointed liaison to the Eastern Trail. And so if you want to connect with me on maybe how to better incorporate either me as a liaison or just, better communication with the council as this project starts to pick up momentum again, I'm happy to connect with you on
Great,
that.
thank you for that.
I just had one comment. So, I think that when Tom announced this last week, I was pretty much the only person that said anything. And, I was expecting to get a lot of heat from the public, which I have. But I also got heat from the chair and from fellow counselors. And I wanted to take a minute to address that. And, there's an expression, it's easier to ask forgiveness than it is to get permission. So that's a quote from Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, a U.S. naval officer. So I think that principle has well established here. I think that what we just saw in terms of the presentation was extremely helpful. Next time, my plea is that if we have a change like this, we really ought to be more deliberate and not do it the way we did. Okay, so that's my simple request. Now, there is one issue. I will say there was a statement in there about it being generally budget neutral or it being sort of essentially fiscally neutral. Those are pretty broad statements. So I have committed to the chair and also to myself to turn this into an HR geek session between Liam Gallagher and me. We'll take it offline and we'll kind of deal with it separately. So, but thank you. By the way, all the literature says this thing is positive. It's something that is being done everywhere. I mean, anything you read says that it's long overdue. I don't know if I can equate it to labor history, the 5-day work week and people getting the weekends off, but it's a pretty big deal, especially these days. And it is related to things that have happened since COVID and so forth. So I think we really do have an obligation to try to, make sense of it. So I'm doing my level best to, get behind it. Next time it'd be a lot easier for me, I think also for the council and also for the public. If, one slight pivot could make it a lot easier for us. So thanks.
I just want to echo Councilor Hamel's sentiment. Like, I totally understood your frustration at the last meeting, and I appreciate the feedback that, Tom and Liam took to kind of take the time today to kind of really walk everybody through a little bit more of an explanation, as well as the work that the comms committee did with Liam to get that FAQ up there. So again, to me, people make mistakes or there's always learning opportunities. And I think in this case, I very much appreciate the work that Tom and Liam have done to kind of get us to a point where hopefully the public has a little bit more information about this 4-day work week. And I'm very, hopeful and excited for everybody that this is going to be great. We have excellent town staff, and the public made that very clear in our survey, how appreciative they are of the service that our staff provide. And I know that staff will continue to provide that exemplary service whenever they're available to serve the public. So excited to see that. One question I did have though, as I was thinking about this, and I might be overthinking it, it's maybe a question for Tody. So when we're doing like early voting, are people still going to be able to come here on Fridays to vote, or will that not be available with this 4-day work week?
It would only be during regular business
Okay.
hours, but they have the opportunity to request ballots to be
Mhm.
mailed, or they can call us.
Okay,
And we will have the ballot box available for them to
so they
return
can still
ballots.
drop it off. Okay,
Absolutely.
yeah, I was just thinking about that. Thank you. All right, any other questions for Tom? No? All right, so moving on to order number 23-028, 7 PM public hearing on the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the zoning ordinance, section 6, zoning ordinance definitions, outdoor storage in section 9, performance standards, general parking and storage. This is being brought forward by the planning director. Tom, is there anything you want to do to set this up?
Nothing further. I do see the planning director here. I would defer to her if there are any substantive questions. I think this has been pretty thoroughly vetted at ordinance and then I think appropriately introduced at first reading.
Yep. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? Anybody in the room or anybody online? All right, I am not seeing anybody offering public comments. I'm closing public comment for this item. Next is order number 23-035, 7 PM, public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendments to chapter 311, Town of Scarborough Schedule of License, Permits, and Application Fees. Tom, would you like to set this one up?
Yes, I think I mentioned at your last meeting, historically, we used to do this as part of the budget process. We would kind of force ourselves to go through a fee review, and as part of the budget order, we've kind of separated the two, but I think it's still a good practice to do it approaching the end of the fiscal year, starting the new one. So we did solicit input from staff. What's before you this evening is a composite of all their different input. Notably, we also had an opportunity to change some fees that came through the Coastal Water and Harbor Committee. These were the mooring and pier use fees, and those have been incorporated as part of this matter. They were adopted in first reading. I do have two items that are, I would ask for your consideration in as an amendment this evening.
Yeah.
The first relates, just trying to get myself organized here. To a fee that the fire chief recommends that we consider. It's raising the construction permit fees for all commercial buildings. And then I guess while I have the floor, and I'll just pass it out to you. The other one, councilors who were here at your last meeting, Councilor Clucci raised the question, is there a way that we can create a mechanism whereby these fees are increased through some sort of CPI or other index? And so we did consult with legal. This is language that could be considered. This is kind of right above the table, if you will, of fees. And it would enable us direct myself to increase, and we've proposed the consumer price index. This would come back to you every other year for your more deliberate and thoughtful consideration. So I just offer those up as potential amendments, if you would.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No, then I am closing public comment. So can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Are there any proposals?
I have an amendment
For the
to
amendment?
add. You want me to do
Yep,
that now?
Councilor Katarina.
All right, so the first amendment is on order 23-035, move approval to amend the main motion as amended to include the following language: to review fees annually. Excuse me, notwithstanding any other ordinance provision to the contrary, the town manager or his designee is authorized to adjust the schedule of license, permit, and application fees on an annual basis to reflect an increase in the consumer price index and publish the adjusted schedule. Town council will review the schedule on a biannual basis.
Second,
Any discussion? Counselor Hamel?
Yeah. Now, are these, my question is, are these all one motion? Okay. So
This first one.
It's that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
I'm just making sure you understand. Okay, thank you.
I like the idea of this, especially after the pain and suffering of not having done it over 10 years, okay, plus year, that's, I don't want to do that again. And, Tom was a veritable wizard in making that happen, make it possible for us to get the mooring fees and so forth sorted out, so thanks for that, but I get a little worried about something that's automatic like this, and, if we're gonna have CPI increases of 4 or 5%, I know it happens to our taxes, but I'm not sure, I'm more comfortable with something that maybe we do it every so many years. But I'm just expressing my discomfort, and probably I need more time to think about this. So anyway, for what it's worth.
Any other discussion points?
Again, I offer this, I prepared this really at Councilor Calucci's suggestion. It's
Mhm.
not one that I think staff
Yeah.
feels strongly one way or another about.
I think I agree with Counselor Hamel of like my immediate reaction from when John mentioned it. I didn't think it was a bad idea, but I do feel like we probably should discuss this more, maybe perhaps in finance, and let finance talk about fees in general, perhaps in the future, and have a little bit more of a discussion on this. So I would actually probably say no right now, but request that finance maybe consider this going forward. So any other discussion on the motion? So all those in favor? Okay. All those opposed? All right, motion fails.
Someone had to support it.
Yeah. So thank you, Counselor Pucci, for putting the idea out there.
so now we've returned to the
We're-
main motion.
Yep, main motion.
I have another amendment.
Okay,
Order number 23035, move approval to amend the main motion to adjust fire department construction permit fees as noted below. And if you go all the way down to construction permit fees for all commercial buildings shall be $40 per square foot.
40 cents per square.
Oh, excuse me. We'll make it $40. Why not?
Yeah.
40 cents a square foot.
Decimal points matter.
I don't have my glasses on. What can I say?
Can I get a second?
second,
Any discussion?
if we could just get some context, I didn't have time to read the letter really quickly. This is coming to us from the fire chief, and this is based on just cost, inflation. I mean, where is the cost increase coming from? Or the drivers?
He was able to actually do some surveying of the Metro Chiefs, that's the greater Portland area, and found out that we were on the low end. And so I think that's informing his recommendation here to really be consistent with our peers.
All right. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. So back to the main motion as amended. Any discussion? No? All those in favor? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
All right. Next is order number 23-037, 7:00 PM, public hearing and action on the request for a combined massage establishment massage therapist license from Jason Chambers, DBA Scarborough Massage, located at 183 US Route 1, Suite E. This is brought forward by the town clerk.
Thank you. This is a new application. We've vetted the applicant and everything is in order, and we are recommending that it be approved.
All right, is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? All right, I'm seeing nobody in the public, so I'm closing public comment. Can I get a motion
So moved
and action?
and action.
Second,
Any discussion? No? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Next up is proclamation 23-002. Act on the request from the Sustainability Committee to proclaim Saturday, April 22nd, 2023 as Earth Day. And this is brought forward by the Sustainability Committee. I don't know if Jamie or April would like to say anything.
Good evening. Jamie Fitch, Sustainability Coordinator on behalf of the Sustainability Committee. The committee just feels like there's a lot going on in the world right now. And Earth Day is definitely a day when people try to do at least think about and hopefully act on various issues and efforts related to sustainability, conservation, and the environment in general. So having the town council take action to proclaim Earth Day and encourage our Scarborough citizens to do something in honor of Earth Day. There are a number of local activities happening. Friends of Scarborough Marsh has their annual marsh cleanup. They're still looking for volunteers. Scarborough Public Library has events around Earth Day. In the larger Scarborough region, there's the Urban Runoff 5K, which I think Councillor Seither is going to speak to in her updates, but that raises funds for clean water education. Scarborough schools benefit from that program. And also the Children's Museum is doing a number of Earth Day activities as well. So just a day to recognize how important our natural environment is through this proclamation. And just to tease that the Sustainability Committee and the Conservation Commission are also planning Sustainable Scarborough Day coming this fall, recognizing that Earth Day should be every day. So planning an event in the fall when people may not necessarily be thinking about these topics quite so much.
Great, thank you. So I'm gonna read this proclamation. So in recognition of April 22nd as being Earth Day, whereas we continue to live through a global pandemic, we are reminded of the extraordinary importance of maintaining a clean and healthy environment. And whereas the global community faces challenges such as health issues, food and water shortages, and economic struggles, and whereas all people, regardless of race, gender, religion, income, or geography, have a right to a healthy, sustainable environment with economic growth and opportunity, and whereas we are all caretakers of our planet and have an obligation to combat climate change and environmental degradation to preserve the Earth's beauty and resources, and whereas it is necessary to broaden and diversify this global movement to achieve maximum success, and whereas this year marks the 53rd anniversary of the Earth Day movement, let it be known that the town of Scarborough, Maine encourages all businesses, institutions, and individuals to celebrate the Earth and commit to caring for the planet and its resources. Now therefore be it resolved that the Scarborough Town Council and the town manager do hereby proclaim April 22nd as Earth Day and encourage the citizens of Scarborough to combat environmental degradation, support green economy initiatives, and encourage others to undertake similar actions. Signed and sealed the 19th day of April 2023, and on behalf of the Scarborough Town Council and the town manager of Scarborough, Maine. All right, is there any discussion on this item? Councilor Katarina?
I hate to admit to this, but I was 14 years old when Earth Day started, and I remember how excited we were. 1970. I think it was however old that is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And I'm happy that we're still celebrating it, but it's kind of sad that we have to remind people about this year after year after year. So that's all I wanted to say.
Right. Any other comments? No, I think just prior to this meeting, we did have the Conservation Commission here talking a lot about climate change, conservation. So again, I think this is, consistent with, the focus of the council and the town to really try and beef up our climate change and conservation efforts. So I'm excited to support this. So all those in favor? It's unanimous. All right, next up is resolution 23-001, act on the request to accept the official zoning map and official shoreland map. And this is being brought forward by the planning director.
Good evening. This item is one of 4 items before you this evening that has to do with the zoning map audit that staff performed a few months ago and that we gave you all a workshop. And so this is the resolution that would If accepted, you would officially adopt or accept rather the zoning map and the shoreland zoning map. And it allows us to have the town clerk attest to it. We would then put it in a prominent place on our website as a static PDF with today's date and this resolution number. And then we would also have them available for print. In the packet, I included the 4 changes that are actually made. So your first map is March 31st, 2023, and then there's 4 changes that have been made to it, and that is reflected on the April 19th version. I'm happy to go over those if you have any questions about that.
Just if I could, my apologies. After the fact, we did provide links, so the maps were more legible and usable by the public. We also had printed copies, full-size copies available in the clerk's office for public inspection.
And that was thank you to Counselor Hamel, I think, for requesting those. becoming
Thanks.
Available.
Thank
So
you.
thank you, Counselor Hamel.
I did have
Any questions?
Yeah,
for
I did
Autumn?
have a question, and my apologies for the request for the other information, because I asked for like 5 different things, and all I really was focused on was the shoreland zone map. I hadn't really seen it before, and I spent some time trying to figure it out. And I wanted you to correct me if I'm wrong, which is highly likely. The maps that are there now, setting aside the GIS map, or including the GIS map, if I look closely at them, they have the shoreland zone hash mark in there. So it's just, you got to really look for it. It's a layer, right?
Correct.
So it's been there all along. The question I had was whether or not it was revised, because the new map that's attached says revised as of this date. So is the revision because we're adding the PDF map, the hard copy
Correct.
map?
It should probably actually for shoreland, it should say as of instead of revised because there's no revisions done. So that's actually a good point. We can change that to just say as of. We just wanted to have a good starting date with it to do this paper copy and the PDF copy and we changed the legends a bit and the detail on the maps to provide the signature line and the dates. So we can change that. I think that's a good point.
Thank you. And one final question, or I guess is sort of an understanding that I would hope that someone could confirm for me, but as I understand, the shoreland zones are actually determined by the state, but that each town posts it. Like if you Google shoreland zone maps for Maine, there's, all different towns have posted them at one time or another PDF files. So is that correct, or do I?
It's a bit of a mixture,
Is it?
but it is a separate from the zoning. And that's why if you read the ordinance, there's an extra step for approving a change to shoreland. So that's why it needs to be reflected as its own map.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Autumn? No. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No. With that, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Counselor Scyther?
My only discussion point would just be to say thank you. I know that this was something that needed to be rectified and that the council and the public really, deserve to be walked through in a slow and purposeful way, but also this was a lot of information to make sure that we had crossed our T's and dotted our I's. And I feel like this process has been really excellently managed. I feel really confident in the agreement that we came to as a council to, around the language about having a single map, the availability of the map. I feel like we put some really good checks and balances in place. And so I'm just thrilled with this work and really appreciative.
Any other discussion? I just want to echo what Counselor Scyther said, but I also want to recognize Counselor Clucci, who's not here today, because I would say he was really the spearhead behind this, and I wish he was here to vote on this and support it. But town business continues nonetheless. So with that, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous.
Counselor Clucci reminded me that he'll be here for a second reading on the other 3.
That's a real toss up, right? Scarborough Town Hall meeting or Paris,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a tough one.
So I'm not jealous of him missing out on voting on these things. So, all right, next is old business order number 23-026. Second reading on the proposed amendments to chapter 419, post-construction stormwater infrastructure management ordinance per state mandate. So Angela, would you like to set this one up?
Sure. Angela Blanchett, Town Engineer. This has been seen by council. I received comments at first reading. Didn't receive any comments, I think, during the public hearing. There are a couple of edits that I just noted in a memo today to the clerk and Tom Hall. Really addressing, I think, what Councilor Hamel and Councilor McGee had brought up. Adding some language in the definition for permitting authority, as well as adding a designee after town engineer and some of the critical pieces of the ordinance. And just a reminder, this ordinance, chapter 419, is just the post-construction stormwater ordinance. So that's, as we talked about earlier, when we were talking about buffers from streams or other ways for water quality. This is as development comes through and builds stormwater ponds or filtration systems, making sure those get managed, maintained. That means there's an annual inspection that comes to the town, and that's part of our federal stormwater permit, the MS4 permit. So it's about updates to increase our oversight and checks and balances, which are spelled out in our permit.
Just for clarity, what I just handed out and Angela referenced, what's shown in green would be the actual subject of an amendment should you wish to offer it.
Right. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? All right, if you could come to the podium, state your name and address.
Excuse me, Wallace Fengler, 233 Holmes Road in Scarborough. I've been going to the planning board meetings for the solar utility scale. And there's nothing in there that I could see about heat, and heat under the Clean Water Act is one of the pollutants. And the solar arrays will raise the water temperature. And there's eastern brook trout in some of the streams, Finnard Brook off of West Beach Ridge Road. So they did make an adjustment to the setback because the developer was going to have a 25-foot setback when Fish and Game and another state agency said 75 to 100. So from my perspective, if I hadn't been there and hadn't raised the question, it sounded like 25 foot would have been okay. But they sent it back to the drawing boards and made it correct and protected the streams and the habitat. But now the next solar project is on US Route 1, the Larry Farm, next to Stewart Brook. And I raised the same question. The original proposal had the water just percolating into the soil, and then they found out that the water wasn't going to go very far because the depth to groundwater was 3 feet to 6 feet. So they're going to have a retention pond, and they were going to have an outlet at the top. So rainwater would hit the solar panels and would warm up. And I've checked that out because I wasn't positive about that, but an engineer that I've talked to that has solar panels on his roof says, yeah, the sun heats up the snow and it slides off. And there's only 20% of the solar energy is actually used to generate electricity. And the rest is either reflected back into the atmosphere or is absorbed. So my concern is requiring that stormwater retention basins empty from the bottom rather than from the top. If you have a culvert at the bottom of the pond and it goes up over a baffle, you're using cold water and that's going downstream. Whereas if you take it off the surface, it's warmed up by the sun, either directly or by the solar panels. And you're gonna increase the water temperature. And that's going into the marsh. And it's also affecting the habitat for fish and wildlife. So I'm hoping that you will change the ordinance to include heat as a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there, anybody else in the public who would like to comment on this item? No? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved. Do
Second?
Any
No.
discussion?
you want me to add these amendments?
Sure.
Okay. Order number 23-026, move approval to amend main motion as follows. Under section 1, municipal permitting authority, after code enforcement officer, strike or and add the. After planning board, add or the town engineer, comma. And then under section 7 enforcement. After town engineer, add or designate. And then under section 7, sub A, notice of violation, after town engineer, add or designate. Is that correct? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. I'm sorry. Section 2.
Actually, section.
Yeah, excuse me, amend section 6, sub 3, after town engineer, add or designate. Sorry.
Second?
Any discussion?
There's actually.
Oh, there's another one?
Section 7, there's 3 places where town engineer
Oh,
or
yeah.
designee, so there'll be
We'll
3.
make it a color other than green next time.
Everything colored green.
Yeah, I think your motion, since we have a printed document, could be just
Just to
clear that at
accept-
first
accept
everything
this.
in green.
In green.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I tried.
Thank you.
All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. So now back to the main motion as amended. Is there any discussion? I'm just curious to ask Angela to offer a response to the public comment that we got back to.
No, I appreciate that. So this ordinance, that's why I tried to spell it a little bit, is specifically on post-construction stormwater ordinance. So essentially, it's after construction is done, a permitted site needs to maintain their system. They need to show that they're maintaining it, and we have enforcement around that. It's not part of, I guess, that initial stage, as Mr. Fengler was mentioning about design process. And one of the things that will be coming in front of ordinance committee and the future in the council is looking at another piece to our stormwater permitting, is looking at buffers. We have specifically written in our MS4 permit about protection around Red Brook and Phillips Brook, our 2 impaired watersheds. So I think it gets to some of that as increasing the buffer, because he's absolutely right. Every project that comes in through the state agencies require, or they recommend, I should say, 75 to 100-foot buffer. However, then DEP provides permitting to 25 feet. So when they're standing in front of the planning board, you have developers standing there with a permit in hand from the state saying, I only have to do 25. So that's where our ordinances are really crucial, and looking at those kind of buffers in order to give the planning board some more legs to be able to address some of those issues, as Mr. Fengler mentioned.
Great. Thank you, Angela, for that explanation. Thank you, Mr. Fengler, for your comments as well. All right, any other discussion on this item? No? All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-027, second reading on the proposed adoption of chapter 420, erosion and sedimentation control at construction sites per state mandate. This is being brought forward by the town engineer, so she's back up.
Yes, Angela Blanchett, town engineer. Again, this is incorporated with our MS4, our stormwater federal permit. One of the requirements of our new permit is to put in a specific ordinance around construction activity. So again, this is after development, after it goes through the planning board and actually on the site as construction is happening, and making sure that all of the essentially state requirements to keep soils and pollutants on site and to manage that is being done. And that is putting it more at a local level for enforcement and looking at compliance issues. So that's what this ordinance spells out. And first reading and public hearing, we did not receive any comments, so I don't have any edits on this one.
Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? All right, I see nobody offering public comment. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All right, I see no discussion. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-030, second reading on the request from the Appointments and Negotiations Committee to move approval of the charge for the Ad hoc Community Center Committee. This is being brought forward by the Appointments and Negotiations Committee. Counselor Shoup, is there anything you would like to say to set this up?
No, I think we went over this last meeting and we're just looking to see if we had any feedback from the public in regards to the creation of this. I think we said that this is gonna, if we approve this tonight, then the appointments committee will then send out, will, communicate out that we're gonna be filling up an ad hoc committee. Then we're not gonna be meeting next month, but then by June, I'm thinking, I think Tom might have a better timeline about that. But this will help us get the first step going and get the applications out there and give us probably a good 6 weeks to get it out there and see if there's some interest.
Yeah, if I could, just with the adoption of this formally, we will reach out as the charge requires. There's certain members from the prior effort that we'll reach out to solicit interested parties. We'll equally do that with the Recreation Advisory or Community Services Advisory Board, and also do an at-large solicitation, a very specific one. Point of which is to have all that ready and in the hands of the Appointments Committee when they meet in June, and they can do their work in evaluating those various interested parties.
Great. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? All right, I'm seeing no public comment. Any questions?
Yeah.
Questions or
when-
discussion?
Question. When we get the names, are we having an executive session as we've done with the ad hoc committees in the past?
Yeah, so I think what we talked about last time is we propose to do this a little bit differently, where the appointments committee is gonna have an executive session to go through the applications and then make a recommendation. And what we said last month was we invite counselors who want to be part of that executive session to come to the appointments meeting. To simply just try to not bog down town council with maybe the details of just an ad hoc committee.
Right, I was just wanting to make sure we were doing it as an executive
Correct,
session.
yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Right, any other questions?
Just a point of clarification, we had a public commenter this evening that referenced a community center and possible partnership with others. I believe this intention is really to be for the town to explore this entirely on its own. And so I expect that this next venture into this subject matter will be considering how the town can do this on its own.
All right, can I get a motion? Can
So moved?
I get a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? No? I just want to say everybody should read Counselor Shoup's Counselor Corner article. I think she did a good job doing some research to highlight, the value of this community center and what it can mean from our to our community financially, but also from a quality of life perspective. So great job on your article. All right, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-034, second reading on the request to rescind unused and unneeded bonded indebtedness as noted in the attached order. And this was brought forward by the Finance Committee at our last town council meeting, I believe. So is there anything else, Tom, or anybody from the Finance Committee want to say to set this up?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, in John Pucci's absence, I'd like to say this is an outstanding piece of work that wouldn't have happened without him thinking of it and just taking it from stem to stern. So and I believe this is going to be indicative of what we will be able to do, hopefully, in terms of additional steps, just getting tighter and more disciplined with how we manage expenses and how we spend money. And this is no knock on anybody, or, no big debate about, which side you're on, pro taxes or, or not. But this is just a smarter way, an old New England way of just being, tight with the shekels, so, and I'm mixing metaphors here all over the place. But it's a great piece of work by John, and it's a pleasure working with him and Karen on the committee. So, I mean, I don't think I'd ever say that about, finance committee work at a budget season. So.
Wait till after budget.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Anybody in the public like to comment on this item?
Richard Hayes, 21 Martin Avenue. I don't know what the list includes because it's not here. I hope it includes all of the items that Councilor Clucci talked about, including the bond issue that goes back to 2009, 2010. I'm in favor. I think it's a good housekeeping move, and as I've stated before, I hope in the future that you consider establishing an end date when bonds are issued so that it's an automatic process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Can I get a motion?
So move.
Second?
Any discussion? Counselor Katarina?
Well, I was not here, obviously, the last meeting. My only question was on that Running Hill Sewer Extension, which Mr. Hart just mentioned. I know it's been hanging around there for a while. And I'm okay with it going away, I guess, but part of the whole point of doing that Running Hill Road rezoning to the Running Hill, whatever it's called now, was because you had this bond issue that was part and parcel of it. And so now you're doing away with it. So then why are we saying we can do mixed use and whatever over there?
I mean, it's been sitting there for so long. I think is part of what we noticed is that it's been sitting there so
Right.
long. And I think the only
Because there
comments that I'll.
there hasn't been a development.
Right, and I think the only comments that I'll reiterate from the finance committee meeting was that generally the public has said we want to slow down development and growth. And this seems like a very simple little step to say, hey, we're not gonna facilitate further growth at this moment, and we're gonna kind of
Right.
focus on fixing our books.
So where I'm going with that is maybe we should be looking at that whole zoning over there. If we're not gonna be saying we're supporting a bond, then maybe we need to put it back into something else, but that's another story for another day.
All right. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is new business, order number 23-038. First reading to refer to the planning board, the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the zoning ordinance, section 2C, zoning map in G changes and amendments. And Autumn, our planning director, is going to set this up. Autumn, if you want to, you can set up all the three of the bundles in your setup so that we can just talk through all of those with one sitting. Sorry, Angela, wherever she went, didn't let her do that.
Oh, no, sounds
I
great.
think the Bruins are on. If I know what else she's on.
This first one is for chapter 405, and it's the zoning map amendments. It has to do with codifying the process that we developed. It centralizes your processing, so all zoning requests will come through the planning department. And then GIS will be responsible for creating all the maps and exhibits that you see. You, of course, approve or deny any of the requests. The GIS department will update the zoning map. As we saw earlier, we would have another new revised paper copy upon a zoning change that was approved. We would have a new revised PDF that the town clerk would attest to.
And that is what these specific ordinance requirement changes are about. The next one has to do with the T and D. And when we did our audit, we discovered a zoning change that was actually moved to T and D, but the T and D had a somewhat strange statement that said you follow the zoning process, but a zoning map change is not necessarily required. And so we decided to make that match. So because there's no other way to determine if it truly happened, if some time lapsed in between that change. So that's what that one is about. And then the shoreland is just getting it in line and making the language match what the zoning map language includes. So that's it in a very quick nutshell, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Are there any questions for Autumn? No, thank you, Autumn.
Thank you.
Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on order number 23-038? I'm seeing no public comment. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Counselor Hamel, you look like you're thinking.
No, I'm shaking my head.
Okay, okay. All right. All right.
Don't encourage you.
All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next is order number 23-039, first reading and refer to planning board, the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the zoning ordinance section, oh gosh, Roman numerals, 16A, traditional neighborhood development option overlay district TND1, procedure for electing traditional neighborhood development option. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No? Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? No, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Next up is order number 23-040, first reading and refer to the planning board, the proposed amendments to chapter 405C, the shoreline zoning ordinance, section 2, zoning ordinance 9, districts and zoning map. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? Seeing no comment, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Counselor
I have a
Hamel?
couple questions about the size of batches. I
Mhm.
don't really know. Small versus large, how big is, you know,
We're not there, we're not that one.
We're not there.
The next
yet.
one.
Next one.
sorry, it's late in the day.
Yep.
Yeah, next
All right, any discussion on this item? No, all those in favor? It's unanimous. All right, next up is order number 23-041, first reading and refer to the planning board, the proposed amendment, chapter 405, the zoning ordinance, section 20C, crossroads plan development to remove the square foot limitations for small batch processing. This is being brought forward by the planning director.
Thank you. This specific request came before staff in a pre-application that we had with Allagash Brewing on April 5th. When we do these pre-app meetings, it's an opportunity for, before they do a submittal, we look at a proposed site plan and go over any problems that we may see, fire lanes, building materials, that sort of thing. We discovered that their proposed square footage for the brewery actually exceeds what is permitted in the small batch processing. And so there was some discussion that we had amongst staff and with legal. We have in the past been able to call a brewery a restaurant, if you will, if it has a food and a full-size kitchen. This particular user does not have a full-size commercial kitchen, so it didn't fall under that. We also have a use called drinking establishment, which is defined in our ordinance, but it's not an allowed use anywhere in any of our districts. So after conferring with legal, since we do have this small batch processing, this was really the only way for us to, if we wanted to, if council wants to allow this use to move forward, we would have to actually amend the zoning ordinance. So when we brought it before the ordinance committee last week, we recommended 15,000 square feet instead of the 5,000 square feet. That's really the only limitation that the performance standards have, and those are included in your packet for small batch processing. After some discussion, the ordinance committee moved it forward with the 10,000 square feet. And so that's what's before you right now. The performance standards would all still apply. And this is only for the CPD district, but the amendment would allow a brewery or a small batch processing, if you will, that could be a coffee roaster or another user of this sort to be allowed up to 10,000 square feet. However, the performance standards, I think, reflect some of the concerns that Counselor McGee had at ordinance committee about location and traffic. So those are still up for consideration when they go before the planning board. So.
Great. Thank you, Autumn. Are there any questions for Autumn?
Yes.
Counselor Hamel?
So I'm quite happy with your explanation and also see that this, refers to some stuff that, I would not want to be done in a small or large batch facility. But say, and what about fat rendering or chicken fertilizer, making? I mean, anyway, I don't know how broad or narrow the definition is. Would those things be allowed? Those things smell very bad, particularly.
It certainly, it could fall under the use, but the planning board, again, under the number 3 on the performance standard, it cannot create unhealthy or offensive odor, emissions, dust, or other airborne discharges. So the planning board still has some
We gotta look. Okay, thank you.
What was the reasoning? I mean, they originally created it for 5,000, so I
Mhm.
feel like there was a reason that they had 5,000. I have a couple questions, but that's the first one is, what's the reasoning behind 5,000?
It was done in 2015, and I honestly don't have, perhaps,
Yeah, my recollection, Karen, is that it was at the forefront of breweries. And it was really a number plucked out of the sky. I don't recall that it had any kind of bearing. If you think back to 2015, this was still a bit of a new thing, kind of tasting rooms, if you will. And that's really what we're talking about here. So I don't believe that there was any magic other than it was a number that everyone agreed on.
I would agree with Tom. I was involved with that. And it was a number because it was new. It was like, ooh, what are these things and what are we gonna do with them? And so that's why they had that number 5.
And so the location that they chose, Allagash chose to do business at was already zoned and they had permission to build a 10,000 square foot facility.
no, they don't have permission. They purchased the property, and this is the first time that staff has met with them, and it's pre-application. So this is the opportunity where they come with their proposal and we go over everything. And so we say, oh, you're allowed, but you have these requirements you have to meet, or you're not allowed. We have these every Wednesday with
So
different.
how does someone buy property and not realize that they were not allowed to perform, to do what they want to do on it, And I think I've seen in the past that we're just sort of changing our ordinances in response to one person, and to Mr. Hamel was saying, what else could this open the door to? And
I think if I can answer for them, I think that they thought they would be considered under a restaurant because Sebago Brewing and None Such Brewing are classified under restaurant, but they don't meet our definition because our restaurant definition doesn't include beverage. And so my very specific interpretation of the ordinance doesn't allow for that.
Is that their experience in Portland, or you just don't know?
I don't
That's just
know.
what they're telling you.
No, that was just, I think our pre-app meeting, they were sort of surprised, but I think that they just probably thought that it was
I think it's
okay.
twofold. It's a function of their business model. They're gonna have a food truck of sorts, rather than a traditional commercial kitchen.
Right.
And secondarily, I don't think, it seems as though they didn't appreciate our definition,
Right.
which really is what this all hinges on.
They should have looked at it before buying the property, maybe. I think I'm a little concerned that suddenly we're going from a 5,000 square foot drinking facility to a 10,000 square foot drinking facility, which would increase the amount of people that could be drinking there. And I don't know if that's part of why there was the 5,000 limitation of saying, we don't want to have a brewery that's enormous where our capacity is double.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
If I could, we discussed this in ordinance because the original proposition was 15,000. That's what was brought by planning. So we talked about that and talked about, if I'm recalling correctly, and I'm asking Counselor Seither to correct me if I'm wrong. Counselor McGee brought up, well, if it's 15,000, truck traffic, potentially with these batch processing outfits. So that's why we, after much discussion, just landed on the 10,000 to compromise on that. So
I appreciate that. That's helpful.
Are there any other questions for Autumn? No. I'm just curious, Autumn, for like some of sorry, I have a question for you before you go. So like for None Such and Sebago and some of those other spots, like from a comparison point, how, do you know what their square footage is off the top of your head, just to,
I do not.
Okay.
know. I think they're probably about the same. None such as two-story, but I don't know about Sebago.
okay. And I thought I also heard an ordinance that, for this particular Allagash, the intent is not to be a dispensary, right, or moving product around, it's really just to serve the people on
Correct.
site?
Yes.
Okay,
I suspect they'll have a small batch, kind of a demonstration vat, if you will, more for aesthetics, but also functioning. But it's our understanding that they're not doing kind of full-scale production. In fact, they're building this to move the tap room out of their production facility on Riverside.
so can you explain a little bit why it wasn't recommended not to include drinking establishment and just making that a qualified use in the CPD? It sounds like we have it in our ordinance, but it's not in any of the sections. So why was that not preferred to do versus
When it,
suggesting small batch?
when I talked over it with legal counsel, it was because we have this very specific small batch processing that actually addresses breweries
Mhm.
and tap rooms, that it was the advised approach, especially since we don't have drinking establishments allowed in any of our other zoning districts. It was just, this was the approach that they recommended.
Okay.
So.
Great.
I will also say it also includes the performance standards. That is a better safety net, I think, than just allowing an outright bar, if you will.
Okay,
So I
great.
think that's part of it as well.
Thank you. All right, can I get a motion? All right, sorry, is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Counselor Scyther?
So we did discuss this, at length in ordinance, and Jean Marie is absolutely capturing the discussion we had. It was proposed to be 15,000 square feet, which was kind of just a number that was brought to us by planning, and we discussed it and said, well, can we do 10 that, and maybe compromise a little bit, not make such a drastic change. We had the discussion about our unease about changing something for a specific property owner. I think, I don't want to speak for him because he's not here, but I think typically Counselor McGee is very much not in favor of making those kinds of changes. But, to planning, and we asked all the same questions at planning or at the ordinance committee rather. And really, I appreciate what Autumn just said, that our performance standards are our safety net on this. And so when we talk about, what other businesses could this be? Well, our performance standards are going to catch us there. Is this going to create more traffic than we're expecting? Well, they're not a manufacturing facility. They're not going to be bringing trucks in and out of the CBD, the downtown area. And so ultimately, I understand Counselor Shipp's concerns around maybe they should have been better prepared in terms of bringing their proposal forward. But I think that this is maybe a small change that we can do that was the cleanest solution, and also isn't going to compromise this business from being a part of the downtown. So I support this.
So this is the only option, like a contract zone, or saying we give one exception to this business owner in this area instead of opening it up to all businesses now from 5,000 to 10,000? Or is this just the recommendation we're going with?
Well, I think
So since it's an allowed use, a contract zone wouldn't be the way you could do it. If it weren't an allowed use at all, you could request that, but since it is an allowed use. Yeah, and there's no variance, there's no special
That's what I was
exception,
looking
there's,
for. Okay.
this is, we thought about
Yeah,
all of the different
I
options.
appreciate that.
And so this is what we were left with. It's the
Just to
easiest.
be comfortable, I'm not aware of another small batch processing use in town, so is that a fair statement?
I'm not aware of any. I think that we may see another similar use in the Downs. The only one that I'm aware of meets the 5,000 square feet requirements, but this might be a use that in the Innovation District could actually be more of a processing facility, and the 10,000 square feet might be more of an appropriate square footage for that. So just to keep that in mind too.
Just a final piece of history, as I recall, this was first allowed and permitted in the Tigers Parkway zone initially, and that was part of a very conscious effort to broaden the allowed uses because that area was not moving forward. And then shortly thereafter, it was incorporated in CBD when it was incorporated for the first time.
Any other comments, discussion? No, all right, I'm gonna call the vote. All those in favor? Right, all those opposed? All right, motion passes. Next is order number 23-042. Act on the request from the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee to have all fee revenues contained in chapter 1401, the Coastal Waters and Harbor Ordinance, go directly to Pine Point Waterfront Reserve Capital Improvement Account. This is brought forward by the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee. Counselor Hamel, is there anything you'd like to do to set this one up?
I was just gonna say, this is a suggestion that Tom made when we were going through the review of the fees. We realized we hadn't been capturing the mooring fees. They're the smaller part of the two fees, but they're still, it's a lot of money over time. So it's a good catch, and it also helps to, will help us to replenish that fund and support our efforts to maintain the pier and facility more consistently.
Great. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this item? No? All right, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? I'm seeing no discussion. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Next up is item 9, non-action items. We have none today. I'm going to combine items 10 and 11, standing and special committee reports and liaison reports and council member comments. Is there anybody who has anything they'd like to share? Councilor Shoup?
Sure. At our last appointments and negotiations committees, we may have some recommendations for the first readings for appointments to committees and boards. So if you give me a second, I'll go through those. First, for the ADA Advisory Board Committee, we're recommending to appoint Ms. Greenstein as a full voting member with a term to expire in 2025. We have the Historic Implementation Preservation Committee, and we're recommending to appoint Edith Waxman as a member. And then on the Planning Board, we have an opening, and we're making the recommendation to move the second alternate James Hebert from up to a full voting member with a term to expire in 2023, and fill the second alternate position with Bennett Flanders with a term to expire in 2023. We have the Senior Advisory Board, which had 3 vacancies, and we had 2 applications, and we're recommending to appoint Eleanor Lehman as a full voting member with a term to expire in 2024. And then we're recommending to appoint Edith Waxman as the first alternate with a term to expire in 2024. And then we have the Sustainability Committee, and we're recommending to appoint Lydia Jop as the second alternate with a term to expire in 2025. So that is from the Appointments and Negotiations Committee. I think we just had all my other boards here. I think you see what they've been working on for the last couple of months and working hard. And that's the updates I'll give today.
Great. Any other updates or comments from the counselors? No? Our Counselor Scyther?
Yeah, I have a lot. So I'll start with Communications Committee. We met last Thursday. A lot of what we covered has been covered in terms of coming up with a plan to better communicate the 4-day work week, the development of the FAQ. So on behalf of the committee, we're also really proud and think that that was great outreach. So I appreciate everyone who participated in that conversation. We also discussed the council position statement on an upcoming land acquisition deal. That is still an internal document that has been circulated amongst the council. I kind of have, as communications chair, I've kind of taken on the role of trying to incorporate everyone's comments. And I will generate a rough final draft so that everyone can kind of see where we're at with that document. It was discussed at the Communications Committee that the next appropriate step for that might be to hand it back to council leadership, specifically John, and have you kind of gauge council sentiment on having it published in the May 1st newsletter. And just in terms of whether or not that makes sense in our timeline, considering what the school actions may or may not have been, and whether that aligns with where we're going to be for our May 4th council meeting. And so that's something that is still in the works. Council Corner articles for May, we discussed the possibility of recapping the conservation workshop that we had this evening, which I think right now there's, I left that workshop feeling great and energized. And I feel like I should probably go home and write that tonight while it's all still fresh. It also in recognition of the fact that Councilor Hamel had requested that potentially he have that space. And so he and I can connect on that and determine what would be, an appropriate use of that space for May 1st. May 15th, we had thought that school building update and where we are as a council, and again, to kind of recap the actions that have been taken to date would be appropriate. On April 10th, we had our first budget roundtable. John and I attended. We did not have too many resident participants, but we did have a couple of people sign in over Zoom, and we had about a 45-minute discussion going through some of the questions that this resident had. Again, we're always grateful and appreciative of anybody who's willing to share that time with us. I will continue to put myself out there. I made a dorky video and posted it to social media to try and drum up some more attention. I'm willing to do that again. Our next budget roundtable is for 4/24, which is next Monday from 5 to 7 at the Scarborough Public Library. Moving on to ordinance, since Nick is not here, just to give the council an idea, we did review and have some initial discussions of where the cannabis working group is at. They are looking to kind of refine their recommendations that are going to come to ordinance. It was my recommendation along with Liam that anything that comes out of that committee will go to ordinance first. And that we will have a discussion there and then hopefully be able to bring forward some things to the full council. We also discussed LD 2003. Autumn gave an outstanding presentation for the council who might want to go back and watch that on our current zoning and density limitations or, possibilities that all the places that this LD 2003 is going to touch and the tremendous amount of work that could create for ordinance. And so that's going to really occupy quite a lot of our time probably. Sustainability. I unfortunately missed the last meeting and so I apologize to Sustainability Committee. They had really been hoping that the Earth Day proclamation would make it onto our earlier agenda. I was thrilled to see that it made it for tonight, even though it is so close to Earth Day. But I want to commend them for bringing that forward to us. They are also having discussions around the creation of a reserve fund, which would be in line with the 2015 sustainability plan that was adopted by the committee. And so I've been in talks. I just had a preliminary conversation with John Clucci about maybe that being something that could be moved to finance because it's a little bit unique in the fact that it doesn't, it's not a fee. It's not an in lieu of fee. Their proposal is that any savings that the town generates by doing energy initiatives would be put into a reserve account. And so the mechanism for that is not well established. And so that's definitely something that would need a closer look. And then last but not least, Urban Runoff is a 5K that is happening in South Portland on Saturday, April 22nd. The town of Scarborough does have a municipal team. I'm really hoping that Chief Holmquist is running. So if you're watching Chief Holmquist, I'm looking at you. He's our ringer. Those of you who have not run with him, he's very speedy. You can ask my husband. He's always just this much behind him. But my kids and I will all be there representing the town, running for the town team. And so it's not too late to register. I would encourage anybody else who wants to come out and run. It's a beautiful run. And it raises awareness for stormwater resiliency and things like that. So I'm done.
Just if I could, don't be intimidated. We proudly have a plaque downstairs in planning that we get the Slow and Steady Award.
Hey, I'm looking to take home the gold. I got 3 little ringers at home training, maybe as we speak, running circles around their daddy.
Great. Any other updates or comments? No, just for the council, there is a pretty robust workshop schedule, probably through the rest of the half of the year. So I appreciate Councilor Shoup having the the Appointments and Negotiations Committee take on the work around the filling the vacancies for the ad hoc committee. So just to highlight a few that are coming up, May 3rd is the joint school budget and audit workshop. And so we're going to be doing that at our next council meeting. There's still a tentative school building committee workshop scheduled for May 4th. I'll have confirmation likely in the next day or two, whether that's going to be on for May 4th, or it may have to move to 2 weeks out. And then on May 17th, we're going to have a workshop on impact fees. And that's really to just kind of have more of a conversation and better understand where we are and where we want to go. So I just wanted to highlight those things. Again, I would just kind of ask the counselors too. You know, we set a very aggressive and optimistic goal framework for this year, and I think we're making progress. But given everything that's happening, like with the LD 2003 and other things that are going on, I just ask everybody to kind of start to look at those again and start to think about, do we need to kind of revisit, reprioritize, make sure that we're, doing this in a sustainable manner and making sure that we kind of pace ourselves appropriately. Again, I think we set a pretty aggressive schedule and I think we're making progress, but we need to definitely kind of ask ourselves and town staff, like, are we going at a clip that's healthy that we can continue on? So just something to consider. Councilor Katerina?
Yeah, on LD 2003, we're discussing, there's a couple of proposals before the legislation. They've had a couple working sessions. One of them was when I was gone, so I'm not quite sure what happened, but there'll be a catch up tomorrow, so I'll let you guys know what's going on with that. I have a feeling it's going to be delayed. Now, whether it's 1 year or 2 years, the question, so stay tuned.
Yep. And I would definitely encourage everybody to watch the LD 2003 ordinance meeting. As Councilor Scyther said, Autumn did a fantastic job. And I think not only are there things that they were discussing, addressing specifically the requirements of LD 2003, there may be other things that, because you have to do such a thorough review of the ordinances, that there might be other things that the committee may explore to kind of tighten up our zoning a little bit. I think one of the things that I heard, and I don't know if I fully understood Autumn saying, is like, we have such variability and there's an opportunity to create some consistency to make it simpler. And so I'm all for simplicity. So if that's something that the committee takes on, I think that'll be great to kind of not only address LD 2003, but other things.
Yeah, and
that
it had to do with the residential, because we've got R3, R4, R this, R that. Well, why don't we combine, make it simple, stupid,
Yeah.
okay?
Great.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say a word? I failed to make comments in my manager's report. I feared my comments at the tail end of the workshop came off harsh and were perhaps misunderstood. That was not my intention. I stand ready and committed to work toward conservation. I guess I find myself wanting to add a little realism into the conversation every now and then. And so I apologize if that didn't come off correctly. I certainly stand ready to support you in those endeavors.
Great, thank you. And I think for closing, with Nancy still here, again, I just want to thank you personally for your service, and serving on the Library Board of Trustees for 2 years with you was just amazing to see how well you lead and guide the trustees and everyone. And everywhere you go in town, I always see you doing something and being involved. And I hope when you go into retirement, we still see you often and frequently out in public. And again, it's just been such a pleasure working with you over the past couple of years. All right. And with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, everyone.